Hey everyone, welcome back to Bald Voldemort. Get ready for an amazing tale. What if Harry was the son of Loki and every lie he told became reality? Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Here we go. Chapter 1, The Boy Who Lied. The summer Harry turned 11, he discovered two things about himself. The first was that he could make people believe anything. The second was that once they believed it, it became true. It started the way most extraordinary things do, quietly, almost accidentally, in the middle of something completely ordinary and awful. Vernon Dursley had been in a mood since Tuesday. Not his usual simmering, vein-throbbing displeasure, but something colder and more deliberate. The kind of mood that had driven Harry to spend most of the week in the garden, pulling weeds with his bare hands, because at least out there no one shouted at him for breathing wrong. It was a Thursday evening in late July, the air thick and humid, and Harry had come inside for dinner only to find that Dudley had eaten his portion and Vernon was sitting at the head of the table with the specific expression of a man looking for a reason. "You broke the lawnmower," Vernon said. Harry looked up. He hadn't touched the lawnmower. He hadn't been anywhere near the lawnmower. The lawnmower lived in the shed at the back of the garden and Harry had a standing, unspoken agreement with it that they would leave each other alone. "I didn't," Harry said. "Don't lie to me, boy. I'm not lying. I haven't touched the lawnmower since April." Vernon's face went through several shades of red before settling on a color that had no real name in the visible spectrum. "You were in the garden all afternoon." "Pulling weeds," Harry said. "In the front garden. The lawnmower is in the back shed." "Are you calling me a liar?" Harry was 10 years old, underfed, wearing his cousin's cast-off clothes and sitting in a kitchen that had never felt like his. He was tired. He was genuinely, deeply, bone-tired of this particular conversation, which he had been having in some variation for as long as he could remember. Something shifted in him. Not anger, he'd had enough anger over the years that it had worn smooth like sea glass. This was something else. Something that felt oddly like clarity. "No," Harry said, and his voice came out steadier than he'd expected, carrying a quality he hadn't heard in it before, something almost musical, like a chord struck perfectly. "You're right, I did break the lawnmower. I knocked it over trying to get to the garden shears and something snapped in the engine. It was an accident and I should have told you immediately." Every word of it was a complete and utter fabrication. Vernon stared at him. Petunia, stirring something at the stove, went very still. Dudley looked up from his second helping with the vague curiosity of someone watching a car approach a speed bump. Then Vernon exhaled a long, deflating sound and some of the terrible red drained out of his face. "Well," he said, "at least you admitted it." He reached for his fork. "You'll pay for the repair out of your birthday money." Harry didn't have birthday money. He'd never received birthday money. But he nodded and ate the small amount of food remaining on his plate and didn't think much about the exchange until the next morning when he walked past the back shed and saw the lawnmower sitting just inside the door with something clearly snapped in its engine housing. He stopped. He looked at it for a long time. He had not knocked over that lawnmower. He had not been near the back shed. He had no memory of anything except the front garden and the weeds and the specific patch of dandelions near the gate that had resisted every effort. But the lawnmower was broken. And he had said it was. Harry crouched down and looked at the snapped piece of plastic in the engine casing. It was a clean break, the kind that could have come from being knocked over sideways. His hands were completely steady as he examined it. His heart was doing something complicated in his chest. He stood up, walked back to the house, and spent the rest of the morning thinking very carefully about what had happened. He tried it again the following week. Smaller this time, less consequential because he wasn't stupid and he wanted to understand what he was dealing with before he aimed it at anything important. He told Dudley, who had been looking for his favorite video game for 3 days, "I saw it under your bed behind the left post." Harry had not seen it anywhere. He'd given the matter no thought at all until that moment. Dudley waddled upstairs. 30 seconds later came the triumphant bellow of a child who had found exactly what he was looking for. Harry sat on the bottom stair and breathed very deliberately through his nose. It wasn't magic. Or it was magic. Obviously, he'd known he was magical since Mrs. Figg had sat him down 2 years ago and explained with the urgency of someone who'd been waiting a very long time to have this conversation that he was a wizard, a real one, and that people would be coming to explain things properly when the time came. He knew about magic. He'd been producing accidental magic since he was 4, small uncontrolled bursts that turned Dudley's hair blue or landed Harry on the school roof when he was running from the bigger boys. This wasn't like that. That was emotion, raw and uncontrolled like static discharge. This was something else entirely. This was intention. This was language. This was the space between a word and the world deciding to agree with the word. He went to the local library, the one place the Dursleys never objected to him visiting, because Petunia had some vague notion that libraries were educational and therefore appropriate, and he spent the better part of 3 afternoons in the mythology section. Not because he had a specific hypothesis exactly, but because something at the edge of his mind kept pulling him in that direction, like a current beneath still water. He found Loki on a Thursday afternoon, in a dusty book with a cracked spine that someone had shelved incorrectly between 2 Roman mythology texts. The chapter was titled The Leesmith, and it opened with a single line that Harry read 3 times before he continued. In the Norse tradition, Loki is the god of stories, and all stories begin with a lie. Harry read the whole chapter. Then he read it again. Then he sat in the library for a very long time, looking at nothing in particular, while something vast and quiet settled into place behind his ribs. He didn't tell anyone. There was no one to tell, and even if there had been, he wasn't sure what he would have said. I think my father might be a god felt like the kind of sentence that got you sent to a very specific type of doctor. He filed it away in the same mental drawer where he kept all the things that were true but unprovable. And he waited, with the particular patience of a child who has never had the luxury of being impatient, for the letter that Mrs. Figg had promised would come. It came on a Tuesday, delivered by an owl that landed on the kitchen windowsill with the casual confidence of an animal that had never once questioned its own importance. The letter was addressed to Mr. H. Potter, the cupboard under the stairs, which made Petunia go the color of old chalk and Vernon immediately begin sweating. Harry read it in his cupboard by the light of a torch he'd borrowed without asking from the kitchen drawer. He read it twice, carefully, and then he allowed himself exactly 30 seconds of something that felt uncomfortably like joy before he put it away and started thinking practically. He was going to a school for magic. He was going to learn to do properly what he'd been doing by accident, or at least some of it. The rest, the part he'd been testing in quiet moments since that Thursday in the garden, he suspected was not in any curriculum. Vernon tried to prevent him going, of course. This was so predictable that Harry had prepared for it the way a chess player prepares 3 moves ahead. "You're not going," Vernon said, on the morning Harry had planned to visit Diagon Alley with Mrs. Figg. "All right," Harry said pleasantly, and then he told the lie with the precision of a surgeon and the ease of a man who has been doing this his whole life. Which, in a way, Harry supposed he had. "Mrs. Figg already called the school and told them I might not be able to attend. They mentioned that in cases where a student fails to appear, the ministry sends representatives to the home to discuss the matter in person. I think they mentioned the word investigation." He watched Vernon's expression carefully. It took about 4 seconds. "Well," Vernon said in the tone of a man who has just been checkmated and is trying to pretend the board doesn't exist. "I suppose, 1 year. But you'll behave yourself and you won't do any of that in my house." "Of course," Harry said, and went to find Mrs. Figg. The thing he was learning, he reflected as he walked down Privet Drive in the warm August morning, was that the lie had to be believed. Not by the target, or not only by the target, but by Harry himself, at least in the moment of speaking. He had to commit to it, had to give it the weight of truth, had to speak it with the same certainty he'd use for something real. The moment he held it at arm's length, treated it like a tool rather than a truth, it slid off the world like water off glass. Which was interesting, philosophically speaking. It meant that on some fundamental level he had to make himself believe it, even if only for a second. And there was something about that, something about the capacity to fully commit to a falsehood, to inhabit it completely, that Harry suspected was inherited. He'd never met his father. James Potter, the official story went, had died when Harry was 15 months old. The story was, by all magical world accounts, completely verifiable. Harry had no reason to doubt it, except for one small, persistent detail that he'd never been able to explain. He looked nothing like anyone on either side of the family tree. Not James Potter, whose photographs showed a broad, laughing face and dark hair that sat differently on his head than Harry's. James's hair was wild by character. Harry's was wild by something else. Something that felt more like elemental property than genetics. Not Lily Evans, whose photographs showed a pretty, red-haired woman with warm brown eyes. Harry's eyes were green, specifically a green that Mrs. Figg had once described, in an unguarded moment, as not any natural color I've ever seen on a person. He filed it away. He was good at filing things away. Diagon Alley opened before him like a promise, and Harry Potter walked into the magical world for the first time with his hands in his pockets and his chin up. And he felt, for the first time in his living memory, like he was somewhere he might actually belong. Gringotts was exactly as described: cold marble, supercilious goblins, and the particular atmosphere of a place where money is taken very seriously indeed. Harry managed the whole transaction with minimal fuss, retrieved a heavy bag of gold from a vault that contained considerably more than he'd been expecting, and was in the middle of wondering whether the Dursleys had known about it when the goblin handling his account gave him a look that was, for a goblin, remarkably close to curiosity. "Your vault," the goblin said, "has received a deposit we are not able to trace to any registered source. It arrived at the time of your birth and has been accruing interest since." Harry looked at the goblin. "How much?" the goblin told him. Harry kept his expression completely neutral through what was internally a fairly significant moment of recalibration. "Thank you," he said. "We attempted to trace the source," the goblin continued with the air of an entity that finds unsolved financial mysteries professionally offensive. "The trail leads to something our records describe as a dimensional boundary transaction. We have only seen this twice in our 4,000-year history." Harry said, "Are you not curious about the source?" "I have a theory," Harry said pleasantly and left it at that. He spent the rest of the afternoon moving through Diagon Alley with Mrs. Figg, who was nervous and kept checking over her shoulder in the way of someone who had been carrying a secret for 10 years and was relieved to be handing it off. He bought his books, his cauldron, his robes, which required the tailor to take his measurements 3 times because she kept insisting the first 2 results were wrong, and eventually arrived at Ollivander's. The wand shop was quiet and dusty, and smelled like wood shavings and something sharper beneath, like ozone. Mr. Ollivander materialized from the shadows with the suddenness of a man who has been doing this for centuries and finds human surprise consistently amusing. "Harry Potter," he said, "I've been wondering when you'd come in." They tried 12 wands. The first 11 produced nothing interesting, a few sparks, one shower of purple smoke that Mr. Ollivander frowned at for a long moment before quietly setting it aside. The 12th was holly and phoenix feather, 11 inches, and when Harry picked it up he felt something move through him, not the magical warmth Ollivander had described in his explanation, but something cooler than that, sharper, like the moment before a sentence clicks into meaning. Gold and red sparks poured from the tip. Ollivander looked at Harry with an expression that was either awe or unease, possibly both. "Curious," he said. "Most curious." He hesitated, and then, in the manner of a man who has decided information is better shared than withheld, "The phoenix whose tail feather sits in your wand gave one other feather. Just one. The wand made from it belongs to the wizard who gave you that scar." Harry was quiet for a moment. "Well," he said, "that's going to make for interesting family dinners." Ollivander blinked. Yes, quite." "Thank you for the wand," Harry said, and paid for it, and walked back out into the warm afternoon sunlight of Diagon Alley, turning the 11-inch holly wand over in his fingers, feeling the way the magic in it hummed against the something else in his blood, like 2 different instruments finding the same note. September 1st arrived with the particular inevitability of important dates. Harry packed his trunk, neatly, precisely. He was a child who had learned that disorder cost you things, and managed the business of getting to King's Cross with minimal involvement from Vernon, who had decided that the best approach to the situation was aggressive non-acknowledgement. Platform 9 3/4 appeared to him with the ease of a door opening, the barrier between platforms 9 and 10 parting like water when he walked through it. And for just a moment, suspended between one world and the next, Harry felt the strangest sensation, like a sound he couldn't quite hear, like the almost word at the edge of a very long laugh. Then he was through, and the Scarlet Steam engine was ahead of him, and the platform was alive with families and owls and floating luggage, and Harry stood still for a moment in the middle of all of it, just looking. He found a compartment near the back and was in the middle of the first chapter of 1,000 Magical Herbs and Fungi. He'd read all the textbooks already carefully twice, when the compartment door slid open and a round-faced boy peered in with the expression of someone who has been looking for something and has stopped expecting to find it. "Sorry, do you mind? Everywhere else is full." "Sit down," Harry said, and the boy sat down with the immediate relief of a person whose feet hurt. "I'm Neville," he said. "Neville Longbottom. Harry Potter." Neville's eyes went wide. Harry had been expecting this, had been preparing for this since he'd read about himself in a history of modern magic and understood that he was apparently famous for something he had no memory of doing. He found it neither flattering nor particularly interesting, but he understood that other people would find it significant, so he filed it alongside the other things that were true about him and waited. "You're really, I mean, everyone says." "I know what everyone says," Harry said pleasantly. "I'd rather know what you say. What house do you think you'll be in?" It was, he had discovered through the previous weeks of careful social observation, the single best question you could ask any child on this train. It cut straight through celebrity and nerves and awkward formality and got to something that actually interested people. He learned more about Neville in the next 10 minutes than he'd learned about most people in his entire life at Privet Drive. About his grandmother, about his parents, about his terror of failing to get into Gryffindor and the specific, complicated shame of being a Longbottom who might not be magical enough. "You're magical enough," Harry said. "You just don't know it yet." He said it with the particular quality his voice carried when he was committing to something, and Neville straightened almost imperceptibly and nodded once with a new firmness in his jaw. The train was an hour from Hogwarts when a red-haired boy appeared at the door with a smudge of something on his nose and the natural ease of someone who has never spent a day worrying whether he was welcome anywhere. "Is it all right if everywhere else is full?" Harry said. "Yes, sit down." The boy dropped into the seat across from him with the energy of a Labrador who's been waiting all day for a walk. "Ron," he said, "Ron Weasley. Harry Potter, this is Neville." Ron's reaction to the name was notably different from Neville's. More complicated, more layered, part awe and part assessment. The look of someone who has grown up hearing a name used in a very particular way and is now making immediate recalibrations. But then Ron did something that Harry hadn't entirely expected. He looked at Harry, really looked past the name, past the scar, and said, "Blimey, your eyes are a strange color." Harry laughed. It came out genuine and slightly surprised, and Ron grinned at the sound. "They are," Harry agreed. They talked for the rest of the journey about the wizarding world, about Quidditch, which Ron explained with the urgency of a religious convert, about Ron's brothers, about Neville's toad Trevor who had gone missing again, about what Hogwarts would actually be like. Harry spoke less than the other two but paid very close attention, building a picture of the world he was entering with the methodical attention to detail that had kept him functional through 10 years of the Dursleys. He was good, he reflected, at learning the rules of systems, and then at finding the edges of the rules. When the trolley came, Harry bought enough to share comfortably, which produced in Ron the specific expression of someone doing quiet arithmetic and landing on a number that shifts the whole equation. "You don't have to," Ron started. "I know," Harry said. "I want to. Tell me more about the chaser position." Hogwarts emerged from the darkness like something that had always been there and was simply allowing itself to be seen. Harry stood in the fleet of boats crossing the Black Lake and watched it materialize out of the night. Towers and battlements and lit windows, enormous and ancient and specific, the way important things are specific, particular, irreducible, and he felt the same thing he'd felt walking into Diagon Alley, the deep cellular recognition of somewhere that might actually be his. The Great Hall was all floating candles and 4 long house tables, and a ceiling that Hermione Granger, a girl who had introduced herself in the entrance corridor with the nervous efficiency of someone who had been rehearsing, told him was enchanted to mirror the sky outside. Harry had said, "It looks like the sky is inside," and Hermione had blinked at him with the expression of someone filing something away. The Sorting Hat sat on a stool at the front of the hall looking exactly like what it was, an old, battered hat, and the first years filed up one by one and sat down and had their fates arranged for them. When they called Harry's name, the silence that fell across the Great Hall had a specific quality to it. The silence of 400 people discovering they'd all been waiting for the same moment without knowing it. He walked to the front with his hands in his pockets and sat on the stool and felt the hat drop over his head. A voice filled the inside of his skull, old and dusty and specific, the voice of something that had spent 1,000 years listening. "Ah," it said, "now this is interesting." "Is it?" Harry said internally. "I see quite a lot of things in here that I don't usually see," the hat said with the tone of a scholar who has found a text in a language they didn't know existed. "Your mind, Mr. Potter, is structured unusually, the architecture of it. There's something." "I'm a Gryffindor," Harry said. "I beg your pardon, I'm a Gryffindor." He committed to it fully, the way he'd been practicing, the total inhabitation of the statement, every fiber of the intention behind the word. "I'd stake everything on it. I'm the one who does the sorting," the hat said with the gentle firmness of a bureaucrat explaining a process to someone who seems confused about it. "Of course," Harry agreed. "Gryffindor, though." There was a long pause. Harry could feel the hat turning around in his mind, looking for the edges of something, testing walls that had no doors. "Slytherin would suit you enormously," it said. "That capacity for the way your mind works, the ambition dressed up as Gryffindor," Harry said again. Another pause, this one with a different texture. The hat had landed on something, he could feel it, not the lie itself, but the fact of the lying, the specific quality of the power behind the words, and it was confused in the way that intelligent things are confused when they encounter something genuinely outside their categories. "You," the hat said in a tone that was no longer instructional and had become something closer to awed, "are unlike anything I have ever sorted." "Gryffindor," Harry said, pleasantly, "and finally, the way you close a door." "Gryffindor," the hat shouted, and the table on the right erupted. Harry took the hat off, handed it back to Professor McGonagall, who was giving him a look of narrow-eyed assessment that he suspected would recur throughout his Hogwarts career, and walked to the Gryffindor table while the cheering washed over him like warm water. He sat down next to Ron, who was already there, already grinning with the specific pride of someone who feels vindicated about a choice they made on a train. On Harry's other side, Hermione settled with the precise movements of someone who has decided to be somewhere and means to stay. "The hat took ages with you," she said. "What was it saying?" "We were having a disagreement about taxonomy," Harry said. Hermione's eyes sharpened. "About what?" "How to categorize things that don't fit the existing categories," Harry said, and reached for the food that had appeared on the table and let the noise and warmth of the great hall settle around him like something he'd been missing without knowing it had a name. From the head table, Quirrell was watching him. Harry noticed without appearing to notice, filed it away neatly beside the goblin's comment about untraceable deposits and the sorting hat's expression of genuine surprise, and helped himself to roast potatoes. Dumbledore gave a speech. It contained the words nitwit, blubber, oddment, tweak, which Harry found interesting in the way of deliberate nonsense. There was intention in it, the way there was intention in Loki's jokes according to the library book. Not nothing, just truth wearing a different face. He made eye contact with the headmaster once, briefly, across the hall. Dumbledore's bright blue gaze held something complicated in it, recognition, or something close to recognition, or something that was reaching toward recognition and hadn't quite arrived. Harry nodded once very slightly. Dumbledore smiled and looked away first. Harry ate his dinner and listened to everything around him, and thought about the coming year with the quiet, undramatic satisfaction of someone who has finally found the table at which they are supposed to be sitting. Outside the castle, lightning moved somewhere distant, too slow for weather, too deliberate for accident, the way Loki traveled between worlds, a suggestion of presence, of attention, of a father watching his son take his first step onto the board. Harry didn't look up. But he felt it the way you feel a hand on your shoulder when you're walking into something new, and for just a moment, just one, he let himself feel something that was not quite happiness but was perhaps the raw material from which happiness could be made. Then he reached for his pumpkin juice and turned to Ron and said, "Explain the keeper position to me again. I didn't quite follow the defensive range," and was, from that moment on, a Hogwarts student. Chapter 2, The Weight of Words. The first thing Harry learned about Hogwarts was that it had opinions. Not in the vague, atmospheric sense that old buildings accumulate character over centuries. Hogwarts had opinions about people, about shortcuts, about which staircases moved at inconvenient times and for whom. Harry discovered this on his second morning when the staircase to the astronomy tower shifted under his feet while he was simply trying to get to breakfast, depositing him on a corridor he'd never seen, and then this was the part he found interesting, shifted back immediately, as if satisfied, as if it had wanted to show him something. He walked the length of the corridor. There was nothing unusual about it except a single portrait at the far end. A woman in Tudor dress who watched him with the specific attention of someone who has been waiting a long time for a particular visitor. "Lee Smith's child," she said without preamble. Harry stopped. "I beg your pardon," but the woman had already turned away, smoothing her skirts with the deliberate composure of someone who has said exactly what they intended and considers the matter closed. He was late to breakfast. Ron didn't ask where he'd been. Ron was constitutionally incapable of concern before he'd had at least 2 portions of eggs. But Hermione looked up from her copy of the Standard Book of Spells, Grade 1, and said, "You look like you've been thinking very hard about something." "I'm always thinking hard about something," Harry said, reaching for the toast. "You look like it was specifically interesting this time." "Hermione," Harry said, with the warmth of someone who has known a person for 72 hours and has already accurately assessed their entire personality. "How do you feel about unexplained phenomena?" She set her book down. "I feel that they're usually explainable if you look carefully enough." "Good," Harry said. "We're going to get along extremely well." The morning held Transfiguration with Professor McGonagall, who had been a tabby cat sitting on her own desk when the first years arrived, and had transformed herself back into a person with the pointed efficiency of someone demonstrating that this lesson would be different from every other lesson they'd had. She took the register with military precision and set them the task of turning matches into needles, and then moved through the room like a weather front, adjusting grips and correcting wand movements with the particular energy of someone who has very specific opinions about how things should be done. She paused at Harry's desk. He was on his 4th match. "Mr. Potter," she said, looking at the neat silver needle lying in front of him. "You've already done it." "Yes," Harry said, "the first time." The first one I did too quickly and it came out more like a very thin spike. I thought you probably preferred the proper result, so I tried again." He paused. "Should I do another? I could try for the eye as well if that's helpful." McGonagall looked at him for a moment with an expression that was either impressed or suspicious or both. "Do 3 more, she said finally, "and work on consistency." She moved on. Behind her, Hermione's match had developed a faint silver sheen at one end, which was by some margin the best result in the rest of the class, and she was staring at Harry's collection of needles with the expression of someone recalibrating their understanding of what competition meant. "How did you do that?" she asked, quietly so McGonagall wouldn't hear. "Magic," Harry said. "Obviously magic, but the how?" "I thought about what the match already wanted to be," Harry said. It was the most accurate description he could give. There was something about the transformation that felt like finding an argument the match would accept rather than forcing a change on it. Language, again, persuasion. He filed the observation. Hermione wrote something in the margin of her notes which Harry found quietly flattering. Charms with Professor Flitwick was similarly revealing. Flitwick was a small, enthusiastic man who stood on a pile of books to address the class, and delivered the theory of wand movements with the joy of someone who has never once been bored by their subject. Harry found charms easier even than transfiguration. There was something about the direct magical expression of it that resonated with whatever lived in his blood, the way certain musical intervals hit differently than others. Neville produced sparks on his first try, then looked so surprised by his own success that he nearly fell off his stool. Harry caught his arm. "Told you," Harry said. Neville stared at his wand. "You told me I was magical enough," he said. That's not exactly the same as, isn't it?" Harry said. Neville thought about this for a moment. Then he tried again and produced a proper stream of sparks, and Flitwick squeaked with delight and knocked his pile of books over. The afternoons were defense against the dark arts, and here things became noticeably less comfortable. Professor Quirrell had the classroom decorated with purple turbans and the lingering smell of garlic, and taught from behind a stammer that was, Harry noted, entirely selective. It dropped away when Quirrell was distracted, or when something he was saying came from memory rather than performance. A man with a genuine stammer didn't stammer inconsistently. A man performing a stammer absolutely did. Harry found the class intellectually thin but paid close attention to Quirrell himself, the way he moved, the way he positioned himself at the front of the room, the way his eyes tracked certain students. He tracked Harry more than others, not with the open curiosity of someone interested in the famous student but with something that sat lower and quieter and had a specific weight to it, like measurement. After class on Friday, Quirrell stopped him on the way out. "Mr. Potter, a moment." "Of course, Professor," the room cleared. Quirrell turned to face him, and for just a fraction of a second, less than a second, the space between one heartbeat and the next, something in his expression was completely different from the nervous, stuttering facade, and then it was back. "I doubly wanted to say how pleased we are to have you with us," Quirrell said. "Your M-mother was a brilliant witch, extraordinary power." "Thank you," Harry said. "And your F-father, quite the L legacy." "Yes," Harry agreed and gave absolutely nothing else. Quirrell smiled. Must be curious about the night US survived." "Not particularly," Harry said. It was the truth and it surprised him a little, but it was true. He was curious about many things, and what was behind Quirrell's turban had moved quite high on that list, but the night he'd survived Voldemort felt like something that had happened to a person he couldn't quite remember being. Quirrell's smile stayed on his face, but something went out of it, like a light behind glass being shuttered. "No, I'd rather focus on the present," Harry said. "History is useful for context, but I try not to let it do too much of my thinking for me." He shouldered his bag. "See you Monday, Professor." He walked out and didn't look back, but he was very aware all the way down the corridor of being watched. The Hogwarts library became Harry's primary laboratory. He went in the evenings after dinner when the Great Hall's noise became excessive, and Ron was involved in some ongoing chess campaign against the fifth year who'd made the mistake of being publicly good at it. He took a corner table near the restricted section, near enough to be interesting, far enough to be unremarkable, and worked. The first thing he established was the mechanism. The lie had to be spoken aloud. He'd tested silent intentions, mental commitments, whispered non-statements, and none of them carried the weight. It needed air and sound, needed the physical act of language, needed to exist in the shared space between speaker and listener before reality would negotiate with it. The second thing he established was that the listener didn't have to believe it. This had surprised him. He'd assumed from his early experiments with Vernon that the lie needed to be convincing, needed to be swallowed whole. But further testing, careful, controlled on small things, always small things because he was intelligent about risk, suggested that the listener's credulity was a factor in speed and cleanness of effect, not in whether the effect occurred at all. A believed lie happened immediately and left no seam. An unbelieved lie took longer, frayed at the edges, occasionally produced strange half-results, but it still happened. The third thing, and the most important, the lie had to be his. Second-hand claims, things he was repeating from other sources, statements he personally found true in some interpretation, these didn't work. It had to be something he knew to be false, speaking it with the full intention of it being accepted as true. The deliberateness was the key, the God in it. He was in the middle of working through the implications of all this. sitting with his charms homework in front of him and his actual thoughts considerably elsewhere, when Hermione appeared at his table with 3 books under one arm and the expression of someone who has been building to a conversation. "Can I sit here? You've been working up to asking me something since Tuesday," Harry said, pushing the chair across from him out with his foot. "You might as well." She sat down, arranged her books, and then looked at him with the direct gaze of a person who finds prevarication inefficient. "The match in Transfiguration," she said. "You did it on the second try. I've been practicing since before we arrived and I still can't get the eye." "Your magic is precise," Harry said. "McGonagall will love you for it long term. But you're trying to force the transformation. You're pushing too hard." "Then how do you, I ask," Harry said. Which was, he recognized even as he said it, the most accurate description of his entire relationship with magic that he'd managed. Hermione looked at him for a moment. "You asked the match. More or less, that's not in any of the textbooks." "No," Harry agreed. "She wrote something in her notebook, then she looked up again. There's something else. On Wednesday, Neville said he'd been sure he wasn't going to be able to do charms, and then you said something and he just did. And he told me you'd said something on the train about him being magical enough, and he'd sort of taken it as a given ever since." She paused. "And Draco Malfoy's shoelace came undone right after you told him it was." Harry was quiet for a moment. He looked at Hermione, really looked, the way he'd been looking at Quirrell, cataloging with care. She had the expression of someone who has not quite assembled the picture yet but is confident she's found all the pieces. "Draco was being unpleasant," Harry said. He was looking down and talking at the same time. His shoelace was probably already loose. "You said your shoelace is coming undone," Hermione said. "Past tense in the original statement. Actually, you used the present continuous, and it wasn't loose. I was standing next to him." Harry studied her. "You have a very good memory." "Yes," she agreed. "I do. And I notice things." She held his gaze steadily. "I'm not going to tell anyone. I don't understand it yet, and I don't talk about things I don't understand." A pause. "But I'd like to understand it." This was, Harry thought, possibly the most efficient offer of alliance he'd ever received. He'd spent weeks at Privet Drive with the uneasy knowledge that his power was visible, was producible, could in the wrong circumstances be witnessed, and that he had no plan for that beyond the vague strategy of hoping no one would put things together. Hermione had put things together in 7 days. He revised his estimate of her upward considerably. "You're right that something unusual is happening," he said. "I'm still figuring it out myself." "I can help," she said immediately. "I'm good at research and I'm good at keeping my mouth shut when it matters." "I know," Harry said. "That's why I'm telling you." She opened her notebook to a fresh page with the efficiency of someone who has been waiting to take notes and finds the wait finally over. The encounter with Draco Malfoy happened on a Saturday morning in the entrance courtyard. The kind of crisp autumn morning that would have been enjoyable if it hadn't been for Draco Malfoy. He was waiting with Crabbe and Goyle, which Harry had come to understand was less of a friendship arrangement and more of an architectural feature. They simply appeared wherever Draco was, load-bearing and decorative. Draco himself was leaning against the wall with the practiced ease of someone whose entire school career had been building toward a moment like this, and his eyes went to Harry with the specific quality of someone who has been thinking about a conversation for a while. "Potter," he said. "I've been hearing interesting things about you." "Have you?" Harry said. He kept walking. This was his first calculated choice of the exchange, not stopping, not engaging on Draco's terms, letting the conversation happen at Harry's pace. Draco fell into step beside him with the smooth ease of someone accustomed to being followed, which meant he was now walking alongside Harry rather than facing him, which was not the arrangement he'd intended. Harry noticed him realizing this and recalibrating. "You did something in Transfiguration, and charms. Flitwick doesn't squeak like that for just anyone." "I like charms," Harry said. "You're supposed to be the famous one," Draco said, and there was something in it, not genuine contempt, Harry thought, but a rehearsal of contempt, the kind of thing you do when the real feeling is more complicated than the script provides for. "The boy who lived, I expected." "What did you expect?" Draco seemed caught off guard by the directness of it. "Someone more," he tried. "More what?" Harry asked with genuine curiosity. "More impressed with himself," Draco said finally, and it came out sounding much more honest than he'd intended, Harry thought. "Everyone in the wizarding world knows your name. You should want people to know." "Why?" Harry asked. Draco stopped walking. Harry took 2 more steps and then turned to face him, and in the morning light Draco's expression was the uncurated version, the one behind the performance, slightly baffled, slightly off balance, the expression of someone who has prepared very thoroughly for a conversation that isn't happening. "My father says you'll be important," Draco said. That whoever has your loyalty. Your father's already thinking about whose side I'll be on," Harry said. It wasn't a question. Draco's jaw tightened. "He's a practical man." "I'm sure he is." Harry looked at Draco steadily. He was, he thought, a reasonably interesting person underneath the armor, not stupid, not simply cruel, but frightened in the very specific way of people who have been taught that their worth is entirely contingent on their position. For what it's worth, Draco, I'm not particularly interested in being important to your father, or anyone's father, really. He paused. But I'll tell you something true. If you spend the next 7 years performing your family's expectations at people, you're going to be enormously bored and moderately terrible at it. You're smarter than that. Draco stared at him. Tell Crabbe and Goyle I said hello, Harry said and walked away. Behind him, after a long beat, Draco said nothing at all, which was, Harry thought, its own kind of response. Ron caught up with him at the courtyard steps. What was that about? Introductions, Harry said. He looked furious. He looked confused, Harry said. It's different, Ron considered this. Is it better? Much, Harry said. He found the book by accident on a Thursday evening in his 3rd week. He'd been in the library working through his potions homework with the specific grim determination that Snape's subject demanded. Snape himself was a figure of considerable interest. A man whose contempt for Harry was personal in a way that had nothing to do with Harry specifically, which Harry found more curious than offensive. When he knocked a stack of reference books off the table, and they cascaded across the floor in the spectacular fashion of objects that have been waiting for an excuse. He picked them up. Most were standard references he'd seen before. But one had slid under the shelving unit, and when he reached for it, the spine felt different, warm almost, in the way wood feels different temperatures in different lights, and the title was stamped in a language he didn't recognize but could peculiarly read. On the Nature of Divine Speech, a compendium of verbal theurgies. Harry sat cross-legged on the library floor with the book in his lap and read for 2 solid hours. The book was old, genuinely old in the way that made Hermione's used textbooks look recently printed, and it discussed the phenomenon of what it called word-making, the capacity possessed by certain divine bloodlines to collapse the distinction between statement and reality. It was not considered lying, the book argued, in any meaningful metaphysical sense, because the speaker was not creating falsehood, they were making true something that had not yet been true. They were authors of the real. And of all the divine lineages carrying this power, the text continued, in a passage that Harry read 3 times with a very steady heart rate, none is more associated with word-making than the blood of Loki Lofison, the Leesmith, the shapeshifter, the god of stories. For Loki understood before any other divine being that all reality is narrative, and that the narrator who commits absolutely to the story determines what the story becomes. Harry closed the book carefully. He sat with it on his lap for a moment in the quiet of the library and thought about a Thursday evening in the Dursleys' garden and a broken lawnmower and a chapter in a mythology book and a goblin's mention of a dimensional boundary transaction and a portrait that had called him Leesmith's child. He thought about the sorting hat's voice, unlike anything I have ever sorted. He thought about the lightning outside the Great Hall on the first night, moving too slowly for weather. He put the book in his bag, checked it out with the librarian under a different title. Not a lie exactly, she'd misfiled it herself, and he simply agreed with the misfilling and walked back to Gryffindor Tower. Hermione was in the common room. She looked up when he came in, read his expression, and closed her own book. You found something. I found several things, Harry said. He sat down across from her. I need to tell you something that's going to sound either very impressive or completely mad. Tell me, she said with the unhesitating confidence of someone who has been waiting to hear exactly this. My father, Harry said, is Loki. Hermione was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. The Norse god, she said. Yes, the god of mischief and lies. And stories, Harry said. That part's important. Another pause. And the power is inherited, yes. Every lie I speak becomes real. He watched her face move through surprise to consideration to rapid processing with the efficiency of a person whose mind runs very fast. I know it doesn't sound anything, Hermione said. It explains everything. She reached for her notebook. The match Neville Draco's shoelace. A pause. My hairpin on Monday, Harry blinked. What about your hairpin? I was struggling with it in Transfiguration and you looked at me and said, it'll hold, don't worry about it. It held for the rest of the day and the clasp was broken. She looked at him with the expression of a scientist who has been running a long experiment and has just identified the independent variable. I've been testing things, keeping notes. She showed him a page of her notebook, dense with neat handwriting, a column of events and a column of Harry's corresponding words. 17 observations in 3 weeks. The correlation is consistent. Harry looked at the notebook. He felt something unexpected, warmth, genuine warmth, the kind that came from being seen accurately and still accepted, maybe for the first time in his life by someone his own age. You've been cataloging me, he said. I've been understanding you, she said, with a firmness that drew a distinction Harry found he appreciated. There's a difference. There is, he agreed. I'm going to show you the book. He put it on the table between them and they spent the rest of the evening reading, and somewhere above them the enchanted ceiling showed stars that were beginning to feel, in some indefinable way, like home. The Quidditch tryout conversation happened by accident. Harry hadn't been planning to try out for the team. He had enough on his mind and first years didn't play. That was simply the rule, and he was not in the habit of pursuing things that didn't suit his current priorities. He'd been watching the tryout from the stands because Ron had insisted, "You have to see Wood fly, Harry. The man was built for a broom," and was sitting in the cool morning air watching the Gryffindor chasers run drills when Neville, who had come for entirely supportive reasons and was sitting on Harry's other side, flinched and knocked his remembrall off the stands. It fell. Harry watched it go. He was halfway to the edge of the stands by the time his brain had fully processed the situation, and he went over the railing on pure reflex. Not jumping, not exactly, more like the world had helpfully rearranged its geometry, and caught the remembrall about 15 feet above the ground with his free hand, while the broom he'd apparently grabbed on the way down steadied under him with the ease of something that had been expecting exactly this. He hung there for a moment, remembrall in hand, on a school broom at the Quidditch pitch, while the entire assembled Gryffindor team stared at him from various points in the air with expressions ranging from impressed to professionally threatened. Oliver Wood landed next to him on the ground. He was a fifth year with the bearing of someone who takes Quidditch the way some people take religion, and his expression was that of a man who has just seen something he'd given up expecting to see. "First years can't play," Harry said before Wood could speak. "That," Wood said, "is a rule I am prepared to have a very serious conversation about with Professor McGonagall." McGonagall, it turned out, was entirely in favor of having that conversation, and had it with herself in the space of approximately 45 seconds before informing Wood that she would be making an exception. The look she gave Harry suggested that she'd been suspecting something like this was coming since the sorting. "Seeker," Ron said on the walk back to the castle. He had the expression of someone slightly overwhelmed by the speed at which events were moving. "You're going to be the Gryffindor Seeker, apparently," Harry said, "in your first year." "Yes, you know who the last first-year Seeker was," Ron said. "Charlie, my brother Charlie, and he was about the best." "I know," Harry said. Ron looked at him with the slightly dazzled expression he sometimes got when Harry was being particularly matter-of-fact about something spectacular. "You don't have to be so calm about it." "I'm not calm," Harry said. "I'm containing enthusiasm." Ron laughed, really laughed, a big genuine sound that startled a group of third-years nearby and clapped Harry on the shoulder, and in the easy warmth of it Harry thought that this was probably what having a friend felt like, this specific texture of being known well enough to be laughed at comfortably. The evening of that same day, coming back from dinner, Harry turned a corner on the third floor and walked straight into Quirrell. The professor was standing in the middle of the corridor with no obvious purpose for being there, which in itself meant something. People stood in corridors deliberately when they were watching a door. Harry followed the logical line of Quirrell's body position and looked at the door at the end of the corridor, heavy, bolted, with a sign that said "Keep out, extremely dangerous." Harry looked at the door, he looked at Quirrell. Quirrell had composed his expression back into the nervous, stammering performance by the time Harry's gaze returned to him. "Ah, Mr. Peapotter, you shouldn't be on this floor after. Dinner hours don't end for 20 minutes, Harry said pleasantly. "I'm just heading back to Gryffindor Tower. The shortcut through here is actually quicker." He paused. "What's behind the door?" "And nothing that concerns students, of course," Harry said and walked past him. He didn't try the door. Not tonight, not yet. But he catalogued the location, the door's dimensions, the specific quality of the magic emanating from behind it, and there was magic behind it. He could feel it the way he could feel the warmth of a fire from a distance. Layered and complex and guarded by something with very large teeth from the sound of the breathing that filtered faintly under the door. At dinner he'd heard Percy Weasley warning a group of second years to stay away from the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side. Third floor, right-hand side. He was on the third floor, right-hand side. He made a mental note to bring Hermione's map of the castle next time. Behind him, Quirrell stood in the corridor and watched him go with eyes that had stopped stammering even when the mouth was still performing it. And in the torchlight of the third floor, the shadow on the wall behind the professor moved slightly wrong, slightly too large, slightly too purposeful, like two people sharing a body that only had room for one. Harry rounded the corner and walked quickly back to Gryffindor Tower. He told Ron about the door. Ron's response was immediate and entirely characteristic. "Dumbledore said stay away from it." "He did," Harry agreed, "so you're thinking about it." "I'm always thinking about things," Harry said. Ron groaned in the way of someone who can already see exactly where this is going and has decided, despite everything, to come along. Chapter 3. The Blood remembers Harry dreamed in gold. Not the warm, amber gold of candlelight or autumn leaves. This was colder, older, the gold of hammered metal and old lightning, the color of things made to last past the point where making things to last seems reasonable. He was standing somewhere that wasn't anywhere he recognized. A place where the ground was a suggestion and the sky had given up committing to a direction, and in front of him was a man. Or a shape that had decided to be a man, which was different. He was tall, not in the way of tall people, but in the way of things that are tall when they want to be and don't bother the rest of the time. His hair was dark. His eyes were green, specifically, a green that Harry recognized because he saw it every morning in the mirror, a color that had no real business being on a human face. He was leaning against something that wasn't quite a wall with the ease of someone who has never once in their life been in a room that made them uncomfortable. "You found the book," the man said. His voice was everything Harry's voice might become in 30 years if it were given significantly better material to work with. "3 weeks ago," Harry said. He was not, he noted, frightened. This was interesting. "And you've been testing the parameters," the man said with the tone of someone who already knows the answer and is asking to see how the question is handled. "Establishing mechanism," Harry said. "Spoken aloud, intentional falsehood, full commitment required, speed of effect varies with listeners' credulity but outcome doesn't." The man looked at him for a moment, not the way adults usually looked at children, which was a look that was fundamentally about calibrating how much to explain, but the way equals looked at each other when they were deciding how honest to be. "You got the practical elements," he said. "What about the rest?" "The rest," Harry said, "is the part I'm still working out. Tell me what you have." Harry thought about the last 3 weeks, the library, the book, Hermione's careful notes, the things he'd tested and the things he'd held back. "It's not deception," he said, "or not only deception, it's authorship. I'm not making things false, I'm making things new, writing a different version of what's true." He paused. "The lie is just the mechanism, the story is the point." The man smiled, and it was the most specifically Loki thing about him, not warm, not cold, not quite either, the smile of someone who has been waiting a very long time for a sentence they already knew was coming and is still pleased to hear it. "You have your mother's speed," Loki said, "and my understanding of narrative." "I have questions," Harry said, "I know." "Are you going to answer them?" "Some," Loki said, "the interesting ones." He pushed off the not-quite wall and walked, drifted really, the movement of someone for whom locomotion is largely aesthetic, toward Harry. "What do you want to know first? Does it have limits?" "Every power has limits. The interesting ones are the ones you find by testing them rather than by being told." He stopped 2 feet away and looked at Harry with the evaluating gaze of a craftsman examining a piece of work that has exceeded its brief. "But I'll tell you the shape of it. You can make true anything you can fully inhabit in the moment of speaking. The further the lie is from what's physically possible, the more of yourself you have to put into it. A small lie, a moved object, a changed detail costs almost nothing. A large lie," he tilted his head, "the lie that rewrites something fundamental about how the world works that costs accordingly." "What's the payment?" Harry asked. "Attention," Loki said. "Not power, not health, attention. Every significant lie you speak, you become slightly more visible to things that pay attention to stories." He paused. "There are beings in the universe that do nothing else. Are they dangerous? Some are, most are merely interested." He looked at Harry with something complicated in his expression, not paternal exactly, but aware of paternity in a way that was trying to decide how much weight to give it. "I'm here because you've been remarkably visible lately." "The lawnmower," Harry said. "The vault deposit, Neville, the match in Transfiguration, the sorting hat." "You argued with the sorting hat," Loki said, and there was something in his voice that was unmistakably delight. "An artifact of immense age and considerable magical authority, and you simply told it what to do. It was going to put me in the wrong house." "There are no wrong houses," Loki said, "but there are houses that suit us less, and you were right and you knew you were right and you acted on it." He paused. "Do you know what's remarkable about that?" "Most people don't," Harry said. "Most people," Loki said, "spend their entire lives being sorted by things with less self-awareness than that hat, and they accept it as inevitable." He looked at Harry steadily. "You never have. Even at 4 years old, when you put that boy's hair back after your aunt cut it, you were watching when I was 4. "I've been watching since you were born," Loki said, and it was the first thing he'd said that carried genuine weight, that had the texture of something admitted rather than offered. "I don't do proximity. I've never been. That kind of parent is not something I'm equipped to be, and I have enough respect for you not to pretend otherwise. But I've been watching." Harry looked at him for a long moment. He thought about the cupboard under the stairs. He thought about 10 years of Privet Drive. He thought about what it would mean to be angry about this, and then he thought about whether being angry would be accurate, and decided that what he actually felt was more complicated than anger and less simple than forgiveness and probably didn't need a name right now. "I'm not angry," he said. "I'd like to understand what I am. I'd like to understand what's coming. And I'd like," he paused, testing the words before he gave them, I'd like to know that this conversation isn't the only one we have." Loki was quiet for a moment. "That," he said, "is a reasonable request." "Good," Harry said. "The corridor on the third floor," Loki said, and his tone shifted lighter, more oblique, the way he spoke when he was about to say something important while pretending it was incidental. "You've been thinking about it. Someone's guarding something very carefully," Harry said. "Quirrell knows about it. Quirrell is also not entirely what he appears." "No," Loki agreed, "he's not." He tilted his head slightly. "You know what's behind the door." "I suspect," Harry said, "the Philosopher's Stone." "Flammel Stone. It's the only thing that would warrant this level of Dumbledore's attention, and I've been through enough of Hermione's research to know that it moved from Gringotts 2 months ago, around the time of a break-in that the Daily Prophet mentioned and then stopped mentioning." "And the thing in Quirrell's turban?" Harry met his father's gaze. "Voldemort," he said, "a fragment, a Horcrux or something like one using Quirrell as a host." Loki smiled again, and this time it had an edge to it. 11 years old and you've already identified the problem. "The problem identifies itself if you pay attention," Harry said. "I pay attention." "What are you going to do about it?" "Not yet," Harry said. "Quirrell doesn't know what I know. I'd rather understand his plan completely before I move. Let him think he has the advantage of the surveillance." He paused, "And I need to understand the stone before I understand what he wants with it." "Immortality," Loki said. "He wants to not die." "He already doesn't die," Harry said. "He's split his soul into pieces. He's not afraid of death, he's afraid of the story ending. There's a difference." He looked at Loki. "A man who truly accepted his mortality wouldn't have done any of what he's done. He's built his entire identity on a lie, the lie that he can exist permanently, that he's above the rules that apply to everything else." He paused. "His power is a lie too in a way, just not one he can control." Loki looked at him with something that was, Harry thought, the closest thing to genuine surprise his face was capable of. "You've been thinking about him." "He killed my mother," Harry said. "I think about a lot of things." The gold light place was beginning to thin at the edges, the way dreams do when something outside them is pulling at the sleeper, and Loki looked at Harry with the expression of a man trying to fit everything important into a shrinking window. "The power has a ceiling," he said, quickly now practically. "You cannot lie into existence something that requires another person's will to be true. You can make the lawnmower break, but you cannot make Vernon love you. You can make Neville's magic rise, but you cannot make him brave. You can only make true the bravery that's already in him." "I know," Harry said. "I figured that out." "The Horcruxes," Loki said, "are made of lies. His lies, not yours. They are fundamentally vulnerable to," and Harry woke up. The common room was empty. The fire burned low, the first gray suggestion of morning at the windows. Harry lay in his four-poster in the quiet of the dormitory and listened to Ron's sleep-breathing and Neville's occasional murmuring. Neville talked in his sleep, always about something herbological, and he ran through everything in his mind with the careful inventory of a person who has just received important information and wants to make sure none of it escapes. The Horcruxes were made of lies. Loki had been about to say something about their vulnerability when the dream had closed. Harry had his own theories. He dressed quietly in the cold dormitory dark and went down to the common room and opened his defense textbook. Not for the content. Quirrell's textbook was thin and deliberately evasive, which was its own kind of useful signal, but for the chapter on soul magic, which was brief and careful and phrased in the way of someone writing about something they found fundamentally unpleasant. He read it twice, then went to his bag and got the book from the library, the Theurgy's book, which he'd been keeping with him because it felt safer than the dormitory. He cross-referenced. He thought. He watched the fire. By the time Hermione came down at 7, she was always first. She set an alarm and he suspected she considered sleep a necessary interruption to reading. He had 3 pages of notes and a theory he was fairly confident about. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, sitting down across from him with the direct observation of someone who finds polite preamble inefficient. "I slept," he said. "It was eventful." She read his face. "The dream," he confirmed everything, Harry said. And added several things. He pushed the notes across to her. "Read the last page." She read it. Her eyes moved quickly, paused, moved back. "The Horcruxes are lies," she said slowly. "Specifically, they're Tom Riddle's lies," Harry said. He told the universe that he would not die, that his soul could be divided without consequence, that he was above the rules of mortality. He leaned forward. "Every Horcrux is a statement Voldemort made to reality, a false one. Because he is going to die, everyone dies, and the universe knows it, and the soul magic knows it, and the only thing holding the Horcruxes together is the sustained belief that the lie is true." Hermione was very still. "And your power works on lies." "My power makes lies true," Harry said, "but it should also theoretically be able to unmake them. If I can speak the truth about something that's been sustained by a lie." "Counter-narration," Hermione said, with the expression of someone who has just found the exact right word for something. "You could rewrite his narrative." If I understand it well enough, Harry said, and if I can get close enough to something central to what he's built. He paused, but not yet. It's November and I'm 11 and I need considerably more information before I do anything significant about Voldemort. Hermione nodded. What do you need? Research, he said. Nicholas Flamel, everything on the stone, Horcrux theory, I know it's restricted but I've already been into the restricted section, Hermione said, with the tone of someone making a minor admission, and Harry looked at her with genuine appreciation. How? I forged a permission slip, she said, and then paused, and the look she gave him had the particular quality of a person who has just realized something about themselves. I forged a document, she said more slowly. I'd never done anything like that before. I thought at the time I'd just convinced myself it was necessary. When were you in the restricted section? Harry asked carefully. Last Thursday, she said. I was walking past and I just knew there was a book in there I needed, and I went in and got a permission slip from McGonagall's desk and it worked, and I found Secrets of the Darkest Art and I've been reading it ever since. She met his eyes. Harry, I think you might have when we were talking in the library and you said you needed research on Horcrux theory. I said it, Harry said slowly, like it was already happening. They looked at each other. You were talking to me, Hermione said, like I was someone who would find that book, like it was already established fact. And then I'm so sorry, Harry said immediately. Don't be, she said with a firmness that surprised even him. I was going to do it anyway, you just accelerated it, and I've learned more in the last week from that book than. She stopped. Don't apologize for the things that turned out right, apologize if you ever do it to hurt someone. I will, he said, and I'll be more careful, he meant it. The ease of the power had a specific danger in it, the way it worked in conversation without him fully intending it, the way certainty of tone bled into certainty of reality. He needed to be more deliberate, more awake to it. What did you find? He asked. She pulled out Secrets of the Darkest Art from her bag with the solemnity of someone transporting something that deserves respect. Horcrux creation is irreversible by conventional magic, she said. The soul fragment is bound to the vessel by the act of murder and the specific dark ritual. Conventional destroying of the vessel disperses the fragment but doesn't reconstitute the soul. It's lost. He's lost parts of himself, Harry said. More than parts, she said quietly. The book suggests that each Horcrux takes something, not just a piece of the soul, something of the person, perspective, empathy, the capacity to feel. She paused. He's been doing this for decades. He's barely human at this point, not because of his bloodline or his power, because of what he's deliberately removed from himself. A man who hated the lie he was born into, Harry said, and built himself into a bigger one. Hermione looked up. What do you mean? Tom Riddle, Harry said, son of a muggle father he despised and a mother who used a love potion. Everything about his origin was a story he wanted to erase. So he created Voldemort, Lord Voldemort, an anagram, because even his chosen name is a rearrangement of what was already there rather than something genuinely new. He looked at Hermione. He's spent his entire life trying to make himself into something he's not. That's the lie, that's the central, sustaining fiction, and everything built on it, he touched the table lightly, is only as stable as that foundation. Hermione was writing very fast. You've been thinking about this for a while. Since the train, Harry said, since I read about him, he's interesting theologically speaking. Theologically, she repeated, and there was something complicated in it, half amusement, half genuine unease. My father is a god, Harry said. I'm approaching most things theologically at this point. She laughed, a quick, genuine sound, and pushed her notes across to him, and they worked through the morning with the particular efficiency of two people who are very different in approach and very similar in dedication. And outside the window the November sky was the flat, honest gray of something that didn't need to be anything else. The Quidditch season opener was Gryffindor versus Slytherin. Harry wasn't nervous, which Ron found baffling and somewhat unfair. How are you not nervous? He demanded over breakfast, while Harry ate eggs with the steady calm of someone who has decided to be present for the meal. I've been on the broom every day for 2 months, Harry said. Preparation is done, nerves at this point are just noise. That's insane, Ron said, with the admiration of someone who finds the thing insane but wishes they could do it. In the stands, Harry spotted Quirrell 3 rows behind the Slytherin section, watching with the particular focused attention of someone who wasn't watching the game. He was watching Harry. His hands were clasped in his lap and his lips were moving slightly, which given what Harry knew about what was behind the turban was not a good sign. Harry filed it away. He mounted his broom. The game started the way Quidditch games always started, which was to say loudly and with immediate chaos. Wood had drilled the team through autumn fog every morning until the chasers moved in their sleep, and Gryffindor were 2 goals up before Slytherin had properly organized their defense. Harry moved to the high pitch and watched, staying out of play, which was the Seeker's fundamental discipline, patience, observation, letting the game happen below while you read the air above. His broom lurched. Not a wobble, not turbulence, not a gust, a deliberate, sustained lurch, the broom handle trying to roll him off with the specific intention of a thing being controlled. Harry gripped with his knees on reflex and leaned forward hard, and the broom lurched again, bucking. He heard Hermione shout something in the stands. He heard Ron say something considerably less printable. Below him, the game had stopped. He could see the Slytherin team looking up with expressions ranging from gleeful to confused, could see Wood screaming something at the referee, could see the crowd rippling with the specific agitation of people watching something go badly wrong. The broom lurched a third time, trying to throw him sideways. Harry held on. His hands were steady on the handle, knees locked, body flat along the length of it. He was thinking very clearly, which was interesting given the circumstances. The control was coming from below, from the stands, specifically from a point he could calculate if he triangulated the angle of the broom's resistance. He'd been watching Quirrell all morning. He knew where Quirrell was sitting. He needed the jinx broken. He couldn't do it himself while managing the broom. He needed someone to break the eye contact, break the concentration of whoever was controlling. He caught a glimpse of something golden. The snitch. 40 feet below him and dropping. A spinning coin of gold light. And in the stands, Hermione was doing something that involved her setting fire to something in the Slytherin section. And the sudden commotion of fire and alarmed people broke whatever concentration was being maintained, and the broom steadied under Harry like a horse settling. Harry was already diving. The dive was everything, pure physics and instinct, the 40 feet closing in seconds, the snitch registering his approach and darting sideways, but Harry had been calculating its trajectory since he'd spotted it, had already committed to the angle before the snitch made its move, and he closed his fist around it 6 feet from the ground and pulled up so hard he felt it in his shoulders. The crowd went off like a detonation. Harry hovered for a moment, 10 feet up, the snitch beating against his palm, and looked up at the stands. In the Slytherin section, a small fire was being extinguished by 3 alarmed professors. Quirrell 3 rose up, was looking at Harry with an expression that had gone entirely past the stammer and the performance and was simply nakedly an assessment. Harry looked back at him across the pitch, unhurried, and held up the snitch. He didn't smile. He didn't need to. That night Ron found the flammel connection. It happened the way important discoveries usually happen, in the middle of something else, accidentally, the way the truth has a habit of surfacing when you've stopped looking directly at it. Ron had been flipping through great wizarding events of the 20th century for a Binns essay, and had turned one page past his destination and frozen. Harry, he said slowly in the specific tone of someone who wants to verify that they're reading what they think they're reading. Nicholas Flamel. Harry was at the table with the Theurgy's book and a mug of cold tea. He looked up. Ron turned the book around. The entry was brief. Flamel Nicholas, celebrated alchemist and opera lover, best known for creation of the Philosopher's Stone. That's him, Hermione said, materializing at Ron's shoulder with the sudden presence of someone who had been expecting this moment. That's who the stone belongs to. Dumbledore's keeping it here. Why here? Ron asked. Because here has me, Harry said. They both looked at him. Earl Voldemort wants the stone, Harry said. They know it's here. The reason Dumbledore brought it to Hogwarts, and specifically the reason he brought it to this Hogwarts in this year, is because he expected a threat and wanted the stone's protection to be doubled. He paused. I'm the other half of the protection. He brought the stone here because I was coming. The common room was quiet enough to hear the fire. He's using you, Ron said slowly. He's not. He doesn't think of it like that, Harry said. He picked up his mug and found the tea cold, which seemed appropriate. Dumbledore thinks in very long lines. He saw this situation forming years ago and he positioned pieces to address it. I'm a piece. He paused. An important one, the most important one probably given what I am, but a piece. That's not, Ron started. He's not wrong, Harry said. I am the best defense against this particular threat, but we have different ideas about what my defending against it should look like. He looked at the fire. He wants me to survive the encounter and let the encounter confirm his theory about love, magic, and sacrifice. He's building a story. So am I. We just have different endings in mind. What's his ending? Hermione asked. Voldemort weakened again, years of slow erosion. A final battle in about 6 years with an older version of me doing the job properly. He paused. Lots of casualties along the way. Ron, your brothers are in that story. Neville, people we know. Ron had gone quiet. And your ending? Shorter, Harry said. Significantly fewer casualties. How? Ron asked. I need to understand the stone better, Harry said. And I need to understand what Voldemort actually wants from it. He can't use it directly. He doesn't have a body. He's a fragment, and Quirrell is a temporary solution. What he actually wants, Harry paused, working through it. He wants enough physical presence to access his other Horcruxes. He needs a body to reach them. The stone gives him life, and life gives him access to the other pieces of his soul. Once he has all of them together, he reconstitutes, Hermione said very quietly. So we don't let him, Harry said. We deal with what's in the school this year and then we find and deal with the rest before he can use them. Ron said. He'd caught the word. He was looking at Harry with the expression of someone making a decision and not trying to hide that they're making it. That's yeah. If you want to be, Harry said. I'm not going to, obviously, Ron said. Don't be an idiot. He looked at Hermione. You too, obviously, you're already in it up to your, you're already. I was already planning the research schedule, Hermione said. Ron looked at them both. He looked at the fire. He looked at the ceiling with the specific expression of someone weighing up what they're agreeing to against the pull of something they can't quite name. Right, he said. All right, what do we do first? Harry looked at his two friends in the low light of the common room. Ron with his freckles and his fundamental decency and his chess-playing mind that saw strategy better than most people twice his age. Hermione with her impossible competence and her unsentimental loyalty and her readiness to pick a lock she'd never touched before if the book on the other side was worth it. And he felt something settle in him. The same thing he'd felt in the gold dream but earthed now specific real. We go to the library, Harry said, and we find everything there is to know about Flamel and the stone and what a fragment of a soul can and cannot do, and then we make a plan. Ron stood up. Library, he said, right at 10 at night. It's open until 11, Hermione said, already moving toward the door. Of course it is, Ron said and followed, and Harry banked the common room fire and walked after them, and the three of them went through the portrait hole and into the castle's nighttime quiet, walking fast, purposeful, already talking, already working, already becoming the thing they were in the process of becoming. Above the castle, in the specific darkness between one world and the next, something gold and ancient and deeply amused was watching with the satisfaction of a craftsman whose best work has begun, at last, to demonstrate what it was always capable of. Chapter 4, The Mirror's Truth. December arrived at Hogwarts like an argument, loud, cold, and determined to be noticed. The castle threw itself into Christmas with the enthusiasm of a building that had been doing this for 1,000 years and had no intention of doing it any differently. Enormous trees materialized in the Great Hall overnight, enchanted snowflakes fell from ceilings, and the ghosts had organized what nearly headless Nick called a caroling initiative that was universally regarded as either charming or horrifying depending on whether you valued pitch accuracy in your seasonal music. Harry noticed none of it particularly. He was in the library. He'd been in the library every evening for 3 weeks, working through the bibliography he and Hermione had constructed, which had grown in Hermione's capable hands from 3 items to 47, cross-referenced by subject and relevance, with a second list of books she'd flagged from the restricted section that they needed to access by methods that had become, over the previous weeks, increasingly systematic. She developed a reliable schedule for when Madame Pince made her evening rounds. Harry had on one memorable occasion told a very small, very specific lie to the librarian about a book already being checked out, which had the effect of the book waiting for them at the desk as if they'd reserved it. Hermione had mixed feelings about this. Harry respected her mixed feelings without being significantly slowed by them. The picture they were building about the stone was detailed and in several places alarming. Nicholas Flamel had created it in 1382, which meant he was currently 665 years old, and presumably had opinions about things that the rest of the world had long since stopped worrying about. The stone produced the elixir of life. Continuous consumption prevented death indefinitely, which was a different proposition than immortality in the Horcrux sense. Flamel's version was ongoing, requiring the stone's continued existence. Voldemort's version was architectural, requiring the soul to be fragmented across objects. The first was dependency, the second was destruction. He doesn't actually want what Flamel has, Harry said on a Tuesday evening looking at his notes. Hermione looked up from alchemy through the ages. What? The elixir, Harry said. He doesn't want to drink something every day to stay alive. That's not what Voldemort is. He wants to be unreachable by death, not sustained against it. The stone is just a means. He wants enough physical form to get back to his Horcruxes, get his soul back together, and then he doesn't need the stone anymore. He'd destroy it, Ron said from across the table where he'd been playing chess against himself with increasing competence. Once he's done with it, which means Flamel dies, Hermione said quietly, which Voldemort would consider incidental, Harry said. Yes. Ron moved a knight. So we're protecting the stone for Flamel's sake as much as anything. We're preventing Voldemort from using it as a stepping stone, Harry said. If he gets a body and recovers his Horcruxes, everything becomes significantly harder. He paused. The stone is the wrong thing to protect. It's the Horcruxes we need to think about. We can't go after the Horcruxes now, Hermione said. We don't know where they are, we don't know how many there are, and even the restricted section books on soul magic won't tell us how to destroy them without basilisk venom, Harry said. They both looked at him. There's a basilisk in this school, he said. Has been for 1,000 years, Chamber of Secrets. Salazar Slytherin's monster. He'd read about it 3 weeks ago in a book about Hogwarts' founding that had been dusty enough to suggest nobody had opened it since Slytherin was alive. Its venom is one of only a handful of substances that can destroy a Horcrux. The other useful one is fiendfire, which is uncontrollable, Hermione said. Yes, you're not seriously suggesting, not now, Harry said. I'm noting it for later, when we have more information and a better position. He looked at the chess board, at Ron's arrangement of pieces, and registered something. Ron, can I ask you something about the endgame here? Ron looked at the board. You see it. White bishop 4 moves from now if black overcommits to the queenside attack. Yeah, Ron said, already seeing it. I've been building toward that for the last 20 minutes. He looked up. You're thinking about the trap. I'm thinking about the fact that Quirrell knows we're here, Harry said. He's been watching me since September. Whatever Voldemort's plan is, I'm built into it. They expect me to get involved and they have a response prepared. He paused. Which means the move they're not prepared for is the one that comes from a direction they haven't accounted for. What direction is that? Hermione asked. Harry was quiet for a moment. I'm still working out the angle, he said, which was the truth, and felt odd in his mouth for being so. He found the mirror 3 days before Christmas, on a night when insomnia and restless thinking drove him out of the dormitory at 2 in the morning. He'd taken his father's invisibility cloak, which had arrived by owl in early December with a note in handwriting he didn't recognize that said, "Only your father left this in my keeping," and wandered the castle's nighttime corridors with the freedom of a person who is invisible and has decided the castle is better company than his own ceiling. He wasn't looking for anything specific. He moved the way he did when he was working through a problem, not toward anything, just through, letting the physical motion do something to the thinking. He found himself on the 5th floor in a corridor he was fairly sure didn't appear in any of the maps they'd made. The door was slightly open, spilling a faint light that had no obvious source. Harry stood in the corridor for 3 seconds, invisible, making a reasonable assessment of the situation, and then went in. The room was empty except for the mirror. It was enormous, 10 feet high, ornate gold-framed, with the words Eris Stra Eru Oit Ube Kafru Oit on Wosi carved around the top in the elaborate script of something made to be read slowly. Harry translated it in about 4 seconds. I show not your face but your heart's desire, and looked at the mirror with the specific attention he gave to things that were more complicated than they appeared. Then he looked into it. He saw himself as he was, green-eyed and too thin, and wearing the invisibility cloak half pushed off one shoulder. Behind himself, he saw a woman with red hair and a man with dark, messy hair who was not quite the right shape to be James Potter. The photographs too specific in his memory to be mistaken. And there was something gold in the scene, a quality of light that wasn't natural light. And standing just behind his reflected parents was a figure that was tall and dark-haired and leaning with the specific ease of someone who had decided to show up in this image and meant it to be seen. Harry looked at the mirror for a long time. He did not feel, as he thought he might have expected to feel, the desperate longing that Dumbledore's books described. He didn't feel the desire to step into it to stay. He felt something sharper than that, something cleaner, recognition, not of what he wanted but of what was true. His mother was gone. His father was real and present and not a traditional parent, and Harry had made his peace with the shape of that in about 20 seconds of their dream conversation. He was not incomplete. He was not defined by the absence. What he felt looking at the image was something that resembled a completed thought. He reached out and touched the mirror's frame once, lightly, the way you'd touch something that belonged to someone else, acknowledging without claiming, and stepped back. Interesting, he said to the empty room. He meant the room to agree with him. Didn't someone cleared their throat? Harry turned. Dumbledore was sitting in a chair that hadn't been there 30 seconds ago, wearing a dressing gown the color of midnight and reading a book that he set down with the unhurried ease of someone who has been waiting and doesn't mind that you've noticed. I wondered when you'd find this room, Dumbledore said. Harry pulled the invisibility cloak the rest of the way off. There was no point in it now, and besides, he found that being invisible while visible was wearing. You've been leaving it accessible, he said. Let's say I've been curious what you would make of it, Dumbledore said. His blue eyes were doing the thing they did, the thing that looked like warmth but was also definitely assessment. Harry had decided early in the year that Dumbledore was genuinely both, and that the complication of that was exactly the complication Dumbledore intended. It shows what you want most, Harry said, which is useful for understanding someone and dangerous for the same reason. What did you see? Harry considered whether to answer. The honest truth was that the answer was neither private enough to protect nor simple enough to explain quickly, so he split the difference. My family, he said, of a kind. Dumbledore looked at him with the expression of a man adding something to a very long calculation. Many who find this mirror see it for hours, he said, days sometimes. I can see why, Harry said. It's very good at what it does. He paused. What is it doing here, Professor, in an unlocked room on the 5th floor? It's been moved, Dumbledore said simply, for safekeeping. From the 3rd floor corridor, Harry said, a pause. Not a guilty pause. Dumbledore wasn't built for guilt exactly, but a recalibrating one, the pause of a man deciding how much of his hand to show. You've been thinking about the 3rd floor corridor. I've been thinking about a great many things, Harry said. He sat down on the floor cross-legged because there was no other chair and he wasn't going to stand for the whole conversation. Can I ask you something directly? You may ask me anything directly, Dumbledore said, with the warmth of someone who has given this answer many times and means it every time while being perfectly aware that answering directly and answering completely are different things. You know what I am, Harry said. The warmth in Dumbledore's expression shifted, not gone, but deepened, became more complex. The way simple things become complex when you add more dimension. I know considerably more about you than you might expect, he said carefully. You know about my father, Harry said. I knew your mother, Dumbledore said. Lily was one of the most remarkable people I have ever taught. Her capacity with charms, with magic of the relational kind, the kind that involves one thing understanding another, he paused, was unlike anything I had seen in my many years at this school. And there was a period in her 6th year when she came to me and told me something she'd discovered about her own history, about her mother's side. He folded his hands. The Evans family had a gap in it, about 30 years before Lily was born. A great-grandmother who appeared in parish records without antecedents, without a family origin, without anything before a certain summer. Harry was very still. The summer of 1910, Dumbledore continued, was when a certain Norse entity was last documented in contact with the mortal world. Documented by us, specifically the Department of Mysteries has records. He looked at Harry steadily. Your mother was not fully human, Harry. She was 2 generations removed from divine blood, enough to be entirely mortal in most respects, but enough to carry the capacity for what she passed to you. She amplified it, Harry said, working through it. 2 generations diluted it to something that could survive a human birth, but it was still there. Still there, Dumbledore agreed. And when Lily's protection, the love magic, the sacrifice met Voldemort's killing curse, it didn't simply deflect it. It interacted with the divine element in you. The combination, he paused, and in the pause was something that looked, briefly, like genuine wonder from a man who had seen a great deal. The combination did something I had never seen and cannot fully explain. It made you something new. I'm not new, Harry said. I'm old. Older than the school, older than the ministry, older than most of the things people here think are permanent. He wasn't performing certainty, he simply was certain in the way of things that have been confirmed from multiple directions. I'm not a category they have, but I'm not a problem. No, Dumbledore said very quietly, you are not a problem. A pause, though I confess you are considerably more than I had planned for. Your plan, Harry said, involves me surviving repeated encounters with Voldemort and eventually defeating him around age 17. Dumbledore's expression was very still. I'm not interested in that plan, Harry said. Not because I can't do it, but because it requires several years of other people being hurt to set up my position. I'm not willing to do it that way. He held Dumbledore's gaze, not aggressively, not as a challenge, simply steadily, the way you look at someone when you want them to understand you precisely. I'm going to end this year. I need you to not get in the way. The silence in the room had a specific quality, the quality of a very long thought being thought very quickly. You are 11 years old, Dumbledore said, but there was no conviction in it and they both knew it. I'm 11 years old with divine blood, a unique magical capacity, 3 weeks of intensive research on the subject, and considerably better information than you have about what Quirrell is planning, Harry said. Also, I don't have a body count on my conscience yet. I'd like to keep it that way. Another long pause, then Dumbledore made a sound that was not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh. What do you need? Information, Harry said. How many protections are on the stone? 7, Dumbledore said after a moment, contributed by 7 professors. Yours is the mirror, Harry said. Yes, and you've already solved the mirror. Because I'm not desperate, Harry said. Voldemort is desperate. He'll see everything he wants right in front of him and he'll try to take it and he won't understand that wanting something that completely makes it unreachable. He paused. What's his current plan, his timeline? I believe he intends to act before the end of the school year, Dumbledore said. Quirrell has been weakening the other protections incrementally throughout the year, testing the layers. I know, Harry said. I've been watching him. He's ready to move within the next 2 weeks. He thought about what Loki had said, the Horcruxes were made of lies. He had a developing theory about the mirror. One more question. The stone in the mirror, is it the real stone? Dumbledore looked at him for a moment. That, he said, is an exceptionally good question. Put it a different way, Harry said. Can the mirror give you something real or only the image of it? The mirror gives you your heart's desire, Dumbledore said. If your desire is to find the stone rather than to use it, the stone appears in your pocket, Harry said. That's rather elegant. I rather thought so, Dumbledore said, and there was genuine pride in it, the pride of a craftsman. Harry stood up. He picked up his invisibility cloak. He thought about the conversation for a moment, what had been given, what had been withheld, what the shape of the exchange suggested about Dumbledore's actual position. You're going to let me do this, Harry said, because you've calculated that I can, and because you know that stopping me would require explaining things you'd rather not explain, and because some part of you is genuinely curious about what I'm capable of. Dumbledore's expression was, for just a moment, completely transparent. All three, he said. Good, Harry said, then we understand each other. He walked to the door. At the threshold he stopped. The Flamel situation, he said without turning. When this is over, I'd like to meet him. He deserves to know what was attempted. I'll arrange it, Dumbledore said. Harry nodded once and left. He found Quirrell 3 days later, not accidentally. He'd been calculating the timing. Dumbledore had left for London on ministry business that Harry was privately certain Dumbledore had arranged to be called away for, a bait of his own design, and Harry knew that with the headmaster gone, Quirrell would move. Tonight was the night. The castle would tell him, the stone would tell him, the quality of the air around the third-floor corridor would tell him. He went alone. Not because he didn't want Ron and Hermione. He'd told them nothing of tonight's plan, which he recognized was a decision he'd need to answer for later and had accepted. He went alone because what he was planning required a specific kind of commitment, a specific kind of truth-speaking, and having people he cared about in the room was a variable he couldn't fully account for. He didn't take the invisibility cloak. He walked down the third-floor corridor in his school robes with his wand in his hand and his hands steady. And when he reached the locked door, he put his hand on it and it opened. Because he'd told it to be opened 3 days ago in passing, and the castle had remembered. The room beyond was large and full of a sound that made his chest vibrate, the breathing of something ancient and enormous. And in the torchlight, the Cerberus that filled most of the available space opened 3 sets of eyes and showed 3 sets of teeth. Harry looked at the 3 heads. Sleep, he said, and his voice carried the particular quality it carried when he was committing completely, and the Cerberus sat down slowly, all 3 heads, and was asleep before the last one hit the floor. He found the trapdoor, dropped through, and worked through the protections in order. The devil's snare, he told it light existed that didn't exist, and it recoiled from the imaginary brightness. The winged keys, he told the broom it was the best one, and it came to him immediately. The chess game, he told the board the game was already decided and the pieces stepped aside. The troll was already unconscious, either by Quirrell's doing or the protection's design. The potion's riddle, he read it, solved it genuinely because he didn't lie about things he could simply be right about. And then the final door and the mirror room and Quirrell. He was standing in front of the mirror when Harry entered. His hands were at his sides, his posture rigid with the specific tension of someone straining against something. Want, Harry thought, pure want. The mirror giving him everything he'd been promising Voldemort and showing him exactly how close he was and exactly how unreachable it remained. Potter, Quirrell said without turning around. Professor, Harry said pleasantly. He kept the door at his back and stayed in the center of the room, equidistant from the mirror and Quirrell, and looked at the man with the same calm attention he'd used all year. How did you get through the protections? I walked, Harry said. Quirrell turned. His expression had resolved itself into something simpler than the Stammeran Nerve's performance, simpler and more dangerous, the face of someone who has decided the performance is over. You should not be here. You should not be here either, Harry said. But here we both are. The boy who lived, Quirrell said, and the voice that came out was not entirely Quirrell's. It had a doubled quality like 2 instruments playing the same note slightly out of phase. I've wondered about you all year, what you are. I imagine you have, Harry said. You are not a normal child, the doubled voice said. The headmaster thinks he understands you. I think he understands less than he believes. He understands quite a lot, actually, Harry said. He just doesn't have all the pieces, you don't either. Then enlighten us, the voice said, and it had shifted now, was fully the other voice, the one beneath the stammer, the one that had once made an entire wizarding world too frightened to say its name. What are you, Harry Potter? You know what I am, Harry said. You've been watching me since September. You've seen what happens when I speak. He paused. You've been trying to figure out if I'm a threat or an asset. And which are you? That depends entirely on what you do next, Harry said. Voldemort laughed through Quirrell's throat. It was a sound made by something that has forgotten what genuine amusement feels like and is operating from memory. You think you can stop me? I think, Harry said, that you've built your entire existence on a lie and I'm the one person in this building who understands exactly what that means. A pause. Quirrell's body went very still. Explain, the voice said, and there was something in it, hunger, genuine hunger, the hunger of a thing that has been in the dark a very long time and will take information wherever it comes. You told yourself you were immortal, Harry said, and you believed it so completely that you made it true after a fashion. You split your soul across objects and called it protection and called it power. You told yourself you were beyond death and reality agreed, partially, temporarily, the way reality agrees with incomplete truths. He walked slowly to the left, one step, two, changing the angle. But the lie at the center of it, the original lie, the one everything else is built on, is still a lie. Tom Riddle is mortal. The wizarding world's greatest fear is a man who is terrified of dying. Quirrell's wand came up. Enough, the stone won't give you what you want, Harry said without moving. Not what you actually want, you want to not be what you are. You want to stop being Tom Riddle, who was afraid of the orphanage and afraid of his blood and afraid of what ordinary death meant for someone who had nothing worth remembering him. The stone gives you a body, it doesn't give you that. You are a child, the voice said, and it was quieter now, and quieter was more dangerous. I'm the son of the Leesmith, Harry said, and I know lies better than you ever will because you've been living inside one for 50 years without seeing the walls. He looked at Quirrell's wand. You're going to try to kill me now, I'd like to save us both the time. You will give me the stone, the voice said. I don't have the stone, Harry said and meant it. Then you will look in the mirror and get it. The mirror won't give it to me, Harry said, still meaning it. I don't want it. Everyone wants something, not the stone, Harry said. I want things, but not that. Quirrell moved fast, faster than his shape suggested, with the speed of a body being driven by something that doesn't feel its own physical limits, and Harry stepped aside, turned, and said 3 words. He told Quirrell the truth, not a lie, the truth. The exact, specific, terrible truth of what Quirrell was. He told Quirrell that the thing in his head had been using him since the beginning. That Quirrell had walked into that forest in Albania and made an offer that had consumed everything he was. That there was nothing left of the nervous defense professor who had once been promising and ambitious and human, that it had all been eaten in the service of something that would discard the shell without looking back. He told it as a story, clearly, specifically, with the voice of someone who could make false things true. And what happened when that voice was turned on things that were already true was something Harry had never tested and was now discovering in real time, which was that a truth spoken by the Leesmith's son carried the weight of divine pronouncement, reality pressing down on the subject of the statement like a hand on the top of a box, making the box be what was being described, forcing the shape to match the words. Quirrell screamed. Not Quirrell's voice, the other one, the doubled voice, the fragment. It was the sound of something that had been told its truest and most damaging truth and had no power to dismiss it, because the person speaking it was the one person alive who couldn't be lied to in return, whose power was specifically, precisely, the collapse of the gap between story and reality. Harry told the truth about what Voldemort had made of himself. Every Horcrux a wound, every murder a cost, every lie a wall between what he was and what he might have been. He spoke it all with the absolute commitment of someone who has prepared for exactly this moment, and the golden chamber lit up with something that wasn't fire and wasn't magic in any conventional sense, but was both and neither and older than either. Quirrell collapsed. The room went silent. Harry stood in the middle of it and breathed carefully and watched Quirrell's still form and the faint, diminishing trace of something dark that curled away from the turban like smoke, diminished, frantic, looking for purchase on a world that had just heard its fundamental lie named and was no longer hospitable to it. It found the crack under the door and went through it. Not gone. He knew it wasn't gone, the Horcruxes still existed, the other fragments still existed, and this had been one piece of a fractured soul, but diminished, set back, denied this particular path and this particular resource and this particular year. Harry looked at his hands. They were shaking slightly, which surprised him. He'd been so certain in the moment that he hadn't noticed the cost until after, the attention thing Loki had mentioned, the visibility, the feeling of having been very thoroughly seen by several things he hadn't met and wasn't ready to. He crouched next to Quirrell and checked his pulse and found one, faint and human, and felt something uncomplicate in his chest. Quirrell was alive, burned, unconscious, stripped of his passenger, but alive. Don't let the door hit you, Harry said to the fading darkness and meant it as something between a farewell and a warning. He stood up. He felt the mirror behind him and didn't turn to look at it. He didn't need to, he knew what it would show him. It would show him what he'd just done, which was exactly what he'd wanted, and the stone was apparently in his pocket. Had apparently been there since he'd stood in front of the mirror the first time, which was interesting and also very characteristic of his father's approach to gift-giving. He looked at it in his palm. Small, red-glinting, warm. He closed his fingers around it. He walked back through the chambers, past the chessboard, past the key room, through the devil's snare's memory of a lie, and climbed back through the trapdoor, and sat on the corridor floor next to the sleeping Cerberus for a long moment, just breathing. Then he took out his wand and sent a Patronus, a fox bright silver, quick-moving, which had surprised him the first time it appeared and surprised him slightly less now, to the portrait of a woman in Tudor dress on the 5th floor, who he was fairly sure had been a communication relay since September, and told it to find Dumbledore. He leaned his head back against the cold stone wall. Outside the castle, very far away but not unreachably so, something golden moved through the gap between worlds. And in the specific silence of a father watching a son do something both terrible and necessary, there was something that could have been called pride if you allowed for the fact that it was Loki feeling it, which meant it was pride shaped like lightning and dressed up as amusement and warm all the way through. Harry sat with the stone in his hand and waited for the headmaster and thought about everything that was not finished, which was most things, and let the quiet of the corridor be what it was. Chapter 5. The God's Attention. The hospital wing smelled like dittany and something herbal that Madame Pomfrey kept in brown bottles, and deployed with the conviction of someone who had decided long ago that the world's problems were medical in nature and could be addressed accordingly. Harry had been there for 2 days. Not because he was seriously injured. Pomfrey had done a thorough examination on his first morning and declared him physically intact, with the specific frustration of a healer who had been expecting more dramatic damage and felt professionally cheated. The issue was the other thing, the thing she kept circling around in her notes and frowning at and declining to name directly, which was that Harry's magical signature had done something she'd never seen a magical signature do. It had expanded. Not dangerously, more like a lung after deep breathing, the capacity larger than before, the architecture of it slightly rearranged, as if whatever he'd done in the mirror chamber had left him permanently different in ways that would take some time to map. He didn't mind the hospital wing, he had books. Hermione had brought 6 on the first day with the efficiency of someone who had been keeping a mental list of what he'd need and had simply been waiting for the appropriate moment to deploy it. Ron had brought a chess set and a very large amount of food from the kitchens, the existence of which Harry had known about since October and Ron had assumed was his secret alone. They sat on either side of his bed and made no comment about the fact that he'd gone to the mirror chamber without them, which was itself a kind of comment. The careful silence of friends deciding whether they were angry, arriving at the conclusion that they were, and then deciding to table it until he was officially not recovering from anything. Harry appreciated the tabling. He was aware it had an expiration date. On the second morning, Dumbledore came. He brought lemon drops and a chair, and the specific quality of attention he deployed when he was going to say something that mattered. He sat down, offered Harry a lemon drop. Harry declined. Ron took 2 and folded his hands in the manner of someone who has organized a great many thoughts into a specific order. Quirrell is alive, he said. He's been transferred to St. Mungo's. The prognosis is a pause, the careful pause of a man choosing precision, uncertain. But there is a Quirrell to be uncertain about, which is more than I expected. Good, Harry said and meant it. The stone is destroyed, Dumbledore said. Harry looked at him. I gave it to you. You gave it to me, Dumbledore agreed. And I contacted Nicholas and we discussed it at length, and Nicholas and his wife Perenelle have decided that the time has come. 600 years is, even by their accounting, a satisfactory run. He smiled gently. They are at peace with it. Harry thought about this. He thought about 600 years of being alive and what you'd accumulate in that time and what it would feel like to decide you'd accumulated enough. I'd like to meet him, he said. You said you'd arrange it. I will, Dumbledore said. Nicholas asked about you specifically. He said, another pause, this one with something in it that looked like wondering. He said the stone told him someone had been holding it who understood what it was for. It's for life, Harry said. Not for avoiding death, those are different propositions. Ron, who had been listening to this exchange with the quiet attention of someone who had learned that the most interesting conversations happened when he stayed still, said, Is it over, the Voldemort thing for this year? The fragment that was using Quirrell is gone, Harry said. Diminished and displaced, not destroyed. He looked at Dumbledore. There are others. Yes, Dumbledore said, and the simplicity of it, the fact that he didn't hedge, didn't soften, told Harry they'd arrived at a new phase of their understanding. There are others, and finding them will take time and care and considerably more information than either of us currently has. He looked at Harry steadily. I would like to work on that together if you're willing. I'm willing, Harry said, on the condition that together means together. Not you knowing things and deciding when I'm old enough to know them. Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. That, he said, is a condition I will accept, though I ask for some latitude in matters of timing when the information carries significant. When the information affects me directly, Harry said, timing is not your decision. Another pause, longer. The pause of a man who has been making decisions for other people for so long that being asked to stop is a genuinely novel request. Agreed, Dumbledore said. Ron exhaled quietly. Hermione, who had been reading with the studied concentration of someone pretending not to listen, turned a page she hadn't actually finished. Dumbledore stood, retrieved his chair, and was at the door when Harry said, "One more thing." He turned. "The prophecy," Harry said. "I know there is one. I know it's the reason you've been planning around me since before I arrived. I want to read it." The silence in the hospital wing was so complete that the brown bottles on Pomfrey's shelves seemed to lean in slightly. "How do you know about the prophecy?" Dumbledore asked, and for the first time in their acquaintance, his voice had a quality Harry hadn't heard in it before, not alarm, not quite, but the adjacent thing, the thing that alarm looked like before it decided what to do with itself. "Because there always is one," Harry said, "in stories like this. And because you have been treating me simultaneously as a child to be protected and a weapon to be deployed since September, which is the behavior of a man who knows more about my future than he's comfortable admitting." He held Dumbledore's gaze. "I'm not asking you to tell me now. I'm telling you that when I ask, the answer is yes." Dumbledore looked at him for a long moment, the full weight of a man who had lived many decades and done many things and was now looking at an 11-year-old and doing a very specific kind of recalculation. "When you ask," he said, "the answer is yes." He left. Ron waited exactly 4 seconds. "How did you know about the prophecy?" "Loki mentioned it," Harry said. "In the dream, your father mentioned it." "Yes," Ron absorbed this. "Right, and you just told Dumbledore you knew." "He was going to figure out I knew," Harry said. "I'd rather he know I know directly than spend energy noticing me noticing things and inferring." He picked up his book. "It's more efficient." "You're the strangest person I've ever met," Ron said with complete warmth and moved his rook. He came on the 4th night, not in a dream this time. Actually physically, materially present in the way that was technically impossible given that Hogwarts was one of the most heavily warded locations in the British wizarding world, and also the castle's own considerable opinions about who it admitted. But then, Loki had never found wards particularly binding, and Hogwarts, Harry suspected, had been waiting for this visit for a long time. Harry woke at 2 in the morning to find the chair beside his hospital bed, occupied by a figure that was simultaneously too tall for the space and perfectly fitted to it. The paradox of something that adjusts its dimensions to suit its purposes. The ward was dark except for the moonlight through the tall windows, and in the moonlight Loki looked like what he was, old and specific and not even slightly human for all that he wore a human shape. Harry sat up. He was not alarmed. He noted from a place of quiet observation that he should perhaps be something more than not alarmed and decided that the observation was accurate but not actionable. "You're actually here," he said. "You did something large," Loki said. "Large things pull attention. You mentioned that." "I mentioned the attention of abstract entities," Loki said. "I'm considerably less abstract." He looked at Harry with the particular quality he had, assessment that was also appreciation, the look of someone who is cataloging good work. "What you did in that chamber, the truth speaking." "I've been thinking about it," Harry said. "Tell me." Harry pulled his knees up and thought for a moment. "The power works on lies because I can inhabit them completely. I can make myself fully believe something false for the moment of speaking. But what happened in the chamber was something different. I turned the same capacity on truth, and the effect was the truth became more true. Reality compressed around it. Whatever he was using to sustain the lie couldn't hold up under the weight of it. Lee Smith's power used for truth-telling," Loki said, and something moved in his expression, something complicated, layered, the expression of a person receiving information they already knew and are only now fully feeling the implications of. "That's not something I've ever done." "I noticed," Harry said. "It's not something you're particularly inclined toward." Loki made a sound that was too specific to be a laugh and too amused to be anything else. "No," he agreed, "I find truth limiting." "I find it useful," Harry said, "strategically. When the target is something built on lies, truth is the better weapon. When the target is something built on truth," he paused, "that's what the lies are for." Loki looked at him for a long moment. "You've worked out the full system." "Most of it," Harry said. "I'm still unclear on the upper limit." "There isn't one," Loki said simply. "There's only cost. The attention. And the self," Loki said. "Every large lie costs a piece of your certainty. The capacity to inhabit falsehood requires you to blur the line between what you believe and what you're performing, and if you do it too often, too large, the line gets harder to find." He looked at Harry directly. "I've lost that line entirely for what it's worth. I no longer know in many cases what I actually believe versus what I've decided to believe versus what I'm performing. He paused, not uncomfortable exactly, but it's a different way of existing than what you'd call a self." Harry considered this. "Is that a warning?" "It's information," Loki said. "What you do with it is your business." "The Horcruxes," Harry said, moving to the next thing because he was aware this conversation had a limited window and he had priorities. You were going to tell me something about them in the dream before it closed. They're made of lies, Loki said. His lies. The fundamental untruth that he could survive the division of his soul, that a person remains a person when you've removed the parts that make personhood coherent. Each Horcrux is the physical evidence of that lie. The soul fragment inside it is not alive, not dead, something else, sustained by the claim that it's still part of something whole. And my power can reach them, Loki said, because they're lies and you're the authority on lies. He leaned back slightly. But not with truth speaking. Not the way you dealt with Quirrell. These aren't lies being told in the moment, they're old lies, set lies, hardened into objects. For those you need something different. What? A better story, Loki said and smiled. One that the object chooses over its current one. Harry turned this over. I have to offer the soul fragment something it prefers. Not quite, you have to make the lie that sustains it less true than the truth you're offering. It's a narration. You have to tell the story of what the Horcrux actually is, what it costs, what it's trapped in, and tell it better than the lie it's been living in tells itself. He looked at Harry. This requires knowing the story of each one, knowing what riddle was when he made it, what he was afraid of, what he wanted. Research, Harry said. Considerable research, Loki agreed. Harry nodded slowly. How many are there? 7 was his intention, Loki said. He made 6 successfully. The 7th fragment is what's currently displaced and diminished and crawling toward Albania on the momentum of pure spite. He didn't intend you as one, but the killing curse, when it rebounded off Lily's protection and your blood, created an unintended fragment. He paused. In you, Harry was very still. In me, he said. The night you survived, Loki said. Yes. The rebound shattered something off the soul that was casting the curse, and it found the nearest available vessel. Me. You, Loki said, and now his voice carried something that Harry had never heard in it, something careful, something that was weight and regret dressed up as precision. A Horcrux that Voldemort didn't intend in a vessel that is simultaneously his greatest creation and his greatest mistake. The hospital wing was very quiet. Outside, the grounds were dark and still, and somewhere on the lake something moved in the water and made a sound like a very large thing turning over in its sleep. He'll have to die, Harry said. Not himself, he wasn't making a self-sacrificial statement. He was thinking, the fragment in me, for him to be fully destroyed. The fragment in you would need to be removed, Loki said. Not you, the fragment. Can it be removed without? Yes, Loki said. It can, there are ways. He looked at Harry with the particular attention of someone who has been carrying a piece of information for a very long time and is choosing this exact moment to set it down. Your blood carries divine properties, Harry. The fragment in you is being contained is not quite the right word, contextualized by what surrounds it. It can't grow. It can't influence you the way it influences his other Horcruxes. It's a soul fragment existing inside someone who is partly divine, and the divine element doesn't recognize it as anything meaningful. It's drowned out, Harry said, more or less, but it needs to be removed before the final confrontation or there's risk. He paused. I'm working on a method. You're working on it, Harry repeated. I have contacts, Loki said, with the tone of someone who means I have leverage over several ancient beings who owe me favors and are afraid of what I'll do if they don't cooperate. Give me time. How much time? More than a week, Loki said. Less than 6 years. Harry laughed, genuinely the surprise of it, and Loki's expression shifted into something that was very nearly warm. It looked on his face like sunlight hitting something that wasn't designed for it and was unexpectedly improved by the contact. There are going to be people, Harry said, who try to make me into something, ministry officials. People who want the famous Harry Potter to be a particular kind of useful. Dumbledore has been doing it more carefully and more kindly than most, but the shape of it is the same. Yes, Loki said. How do I handle it without burning everything down? Who says burning it down is wrong? Loki said. I like Hogwarts, Harry said. I like my friends, I'd rather not be expelled. Boring but practical, Loki acknowledged. Handle it the way you've been handling it, be exactly what you are, let people build their expectations on that, and then simply be slightly more of yourself than they planned for. The gap between what they expect and what you are is where the power lives. He stood, drifted upright, the motion not quite physical. You don't perform to their expectations, and you don't fight their expectations. You make their expectations true, the true version, not the comfortable one. The true version of Harry Potter, Harry said. Which is what you've been doing since September, Loki said. You just haven't had anyone tell you it was deliberate. He was moving toward the window, which should have been impossible. They were on the 3rd floor of the hospital wing and the window was latched and leaded and wasn't. One more thing, Harry said. Loki paused. The ministry is going to hear about what happened, Harry said. They'll come to the school. They'll want to interview me. There's a man there. I've been reading about him, Cornelius Fudge. He's going to want to make this into a story that doesn't involve Voldemort being active, because that's the story that keeps him comfortable. Yes, Loki said. I'm not going to let him. I know, Loki said with the satisfaction of foregone conclusions. I wanted you to know, Harry said, in case it gets loud. Loud things don't bother me, Loki said. I invented loud. He looked at Harry one last time, and in the moonlight the expression on his face was the one Harry had seen in the mirror, the specific, contained warmth of someone who loves a thing and has decided to admit it only in the most oblique available terms. You did well, Harry. I know, Harry said, because he did, and because Loki would appreciate the absence of false modesty. Loki's expression moved into something that was, unmistakably, a grin. Then the window was empty, and the chair was empty, and the hospital wing smelled like Dittany and brown bottles, and Harry lay back down and looked at the ceiling and thought about Horcruxes and truth and the specific arithmetic of a problem that had more pieces than he'd hoped and fewer than he'd feared. He was asleep in 4 minutes. The ministry arrived on a Friday. 2 of them, a woman from the Department of Magical Law Enforcement named Millicent Bagnold, who was apparently the current minister, and had the bearing of someone who had been dealing with emergencies for 30 years, and found them increasingly tiresome, and a round, worried-looking man who was introduced as Cornelius Fudge, junior minister, and who looked at Harry with the expression of someone trying to decide which of several competing narratives was least inconvenient. They held the meeting in Dumbledore's office. Harry sat across from both of them with Dumbledore at his shoulder and his hands in his lap and his face arranged into the expression of cooperative attentiveness, which he'd found was the fastest way to get through conversations he wanted finished. Mr. Potter, Bagnold said, we understand there was an incident. There was, Harry agreed. Can you describe it? Professor Quirrell was possessed by a fragment of Lord Voldemort's soul, Harry said, deploying the name with the same ease he'd use for any other noun. He was attempting to steal the Philosopher's Stone, which had been moved from Gringotts to Hogwarts for safeguarding. I stopped him. Fudge made a small sound. You'll understand, Bagnold said carefully, that the claim about you-know-who requires Voldemort, Harry said pleasantly. Fudge made the sound again. Requires verification, Bagnold continued with the practiced composure of a woman who had heard that name deployed like a weapon and was declining to flinch. We'll need to examine Professor Quirrell. We'll need to review the evidence. Examine him thoroughly, Harry said. The soul fragment left residue. Your department's forensic magic will find it if they know what to look for. He paused. I'd suggest consulting someone who specializes in dark magic detection. The residue has a specific signature, similar to Dementor contamination but denser, more purposeful. Bagnold was looking at him with the expression of a woman recalibrating a mental age estimate. You've researched this. Extensively, Harry said. You're 11 years old, Fudge said, and it came out sounding plaintive, like an observation being deployed as an argument. Yes, Harry agreed. This is, Mr. Potter, this is an extraordinary claim. The idea that Voldemort is active, that he attempted to steal the stone to use as a material anchor for his reconstitution, Harry said. He currently exists as a soul fragment without a body, displaced and weakened. He has multiple additional Horcruxes, objects containing soul fragments, that will need to be found and destroyed before he can be considered permanently dealt with. He looked at Fudge with the direct, steady gaze he'd been practicing since he was old enough to understand that some people needed to be looked at very specifically to understand that you were serious. I know this is inconvenient. It would be more convenient if the threat had resolved itself. It hasn't. Treating it as if it will cost lives. Fudge opened and closed his mouth. The ministry's response, Harry continued, should involve several things. A quiet investigation into Quirrell's recent movements and contacts. A discreet alert to Auror teams about Horcrux signatures. I can provide a description. And a review of recent unexplained disappearances or magical incidents that might indicate Voldemort's remaining followers attempting to locate and use his existing Horcruxes. Bagnold was writing something. This was a good sign. It meant she'd passed through surprise into pragmatism, which was the useful mode. Fudge had not passed through surprise. He was still in it, rotating slowly, looking for the door. The thing is, he said, the thing is, Mr. Potter, that the wizarding public, the confidence, the sense of security. Fudge, Harry said, and his voice carried the particular quality without his deliberately deploying it, the quality that made things settle into the shapes he named. The public's confidence is not more important than their safety, and their safety requires accurate information about what they're facing. You know this. You're a practical man and you've dealt with enough in your career to know that the problems that go unaddressed don't go away, they simply become more expensive later. Fudge looked at Harry. Something moved in his expression. The slow, uncomfortable movement of a man who has built a great deal of his professional identity around preferring comfortable untruths and is being told, by a person who has a specific relationship with the nature of truth, that this preference is no longer viable. What would you have us do? He said, and it was smaller than his previous statements, more honest. the question of a man who has run out of positions and is asking for directions. Exactly what I said, Harry told him. Investigate, quietly prepare. You don't have to announce anything to the public, you just have to not ignore it internally. He paused. There's a difference between managing information and burying it. The first is reasonable governance. The second is how you end up with a war. The meeting lasted another 40 minutes. Bagnold asked 12 more questions and Harry answered all of them completely. Fudge asked 4 more questions and Harry answered those as well, and by the end something had shifted in Fudge's expression, not conviction, not quite, but the beginning of the thought that conviction might be unavoidable. When they left, Dumbledore looked at Harry with an expression that was layered in the way of things that carry several simultaneous meanings. The ministry response you outlined, he said. Reasonable, achievable, and directed, Harry said. He needs to feel like he has agency in the situation. Fudge specifically, he's not a bad man, he's a frightened one. Give frightened people a task they can do and they do it. You managed him, Dumbledore said. I gave him accurate information in a format that was usable, Harry said. That's not management, that's just communication. Dumbledore made the sound again, the one that was not quite a sigh and not quite a laugh. You're going to be enormously significant in the coming years, he said. And it was the most honest thing he'd said to Harry since the mirror room, without strategy in it, without the careful framing of someone managing a conversation. I know, Harry said. I'd rather be useful than significant, but I'll take both. The last week of term was quiet in the way that follows something loud, the particular stillness of a place that has processed something large and is settling back into its shape. Exams were taken. Harry did well across all subjects with the specific advantage of someone who has been reading well past the curriculum since October and who, in defense against the dark arts, had no teacher to examine them and was assessed instead by McGonagall via a practical demonstration that made the deputy headmistress clear her throat twice and write something rather emphatic in her notes. He found Draco on the last evening in the library alone, which was unusual enough that Harry paused in the doorway. Draco looked up. His expression went through several things quickly, the reflex performance and then the dropping of the performance, and then the slightly exposed look of someone whose performance has been failing them for several months and who has not yet decided what to replace it with. Potter, he said. Malfoy, Harry said, and came in and sat down 2 chairs along from him, not opposite, that was confrontational but adjacent, the arrangement of people who are in the same place for different reasons and are allowing for the possibility of conversation. Draco was quiet for a moment. I heard what happened, he said finally, with Quirrell. Most people have by now, Harry said. My father wrote me, Draco said, and his voice had a different quality on the word father than it usually did, less performance, more weight, the weight of a word that means something complicated. He said he was very interested in your approach to the ministry representatives. Your father has sources in the ministry, Harry said, it wasn't a question. He has sources everywhere, Draco said, and it wasn't a boast. It was a fact delivered with the slight exhaustion of someone for whom their father's extensive network is less a comfort and more a monitoring system. He said you handled Fudge well. He said, a pause, he said you were more than he'd planned for. That seems to be a common assessment, Harry said. Draco looked at him. He told me to get close to you, he said, and the bluntness of it surprised Harry into stillness for just a moment, and then he understood that the bluntness was deliberate, the first fully unperformed thing Draco had said to him all year. He said your loyalty would be worth that whoever had your, I know what he said, Harry said. He said the same thing to you in September through you, it's a reasonable strategy. I'm telling you, Draco said, and now his jaw was tight and his voice had the specific quality of someone saying something that is costing them something. Because I thought you should know. Rather than just, he stopped. It seemed like the kind of thing you'd find useful to know. Harry looked at Draco for a moment, at the boy behind the strategy, the person behind the Malfoy performance, who was, he thought, sharper and more honest than he'd been allowed to be, and who had just done something that required a kind of courage that didn't get discussed much in the context of Gryffindor and Slytherin because it was the quiet kind. The kind that didn't look like anything from the outside. Thank you, Harry said. I mean that. Draco nodded once, jaw still tight. What do you want? Harry asked. Not what your father wants. What do you want from all of this? School. The next 7 years. Draco looked at him like this was a question whose existence he'd suspected but whose arrival he hadn't prepared for. I want, he started and stopped and tried again. I want to be good at something that matters, he said, not because of my name. You're good at potions, Harry said. Snape gives you points because you earn them, not because of your name. He'd give them to anyone who did the work, and you're not stupid. You've been performing stupid because it's safer, but you're not. Draco looked at him with an expression that had moved past the exposed quality into something rawer and less categorizable. I'm not going to be your father's asset, Harry said, but I'm not your enemy either. You've been trying to figure out if those are the only 2 options. Aren't they? No, Harry said, and said it with the voice that committed to things, but he meant it as plainly true, and the truth pressed into the space between them and made itself real in the way truths did when spoken without artifice. There are always more options than the ones you've been offered. Draco was quiet for a long time. Okay, he said finally, which was less of an answer and more of a door left open. Harry thought that was probably sufficient for now. He picked up his book. Draco picked up his. The library was quiet around them, and outside the windows the last light of the year was long and golden and entirely indifferent to the complications of 11-year-olds, which was perhaps its most useful quality. The Hogwarts Express moved south through countryside going gold and green with early summer, and Harry sat in a compartment with Ron and Hermione and Neville, who had found Trevor twice this term, both times with Harry's assistance, and who had grown 3 inches since September in a way that felt less physical and more fundamental, like the kind of growing that happens to the inside first. And the 4 of them occupied the space with the ease of people who have spent 9 months becoming the specific version of themselves that fits exactly this context. Ron was playing chess. Neville was reading something botanical. Hermione had 2 books open simultaneously, which Harry had stopped finding remarkable around November. Harry was watching the countryside go past, thinking. "You're doing the thinking thing," Ron said without looking up from his chess. "I do the thinking thing constantly," Harry said. "The specific one, the long one, the one where you look at whatever's in front of you and you're actually somewhere completely different." Ron moved a piece. "You've been doing it since we left." Harry looked at his reflection in the window, green eyes, dark hair, a scar that was, in this light, barely visible. "I was thinking about next year," he said. "And the year after," Hermione said, equally without looking up. "And the year after that," Harry agreed. "We know," Neville said simply. Harry looked at all 3 of them, at Ron's straightforward loyalty, his good mind running clean and clear beneath the easygoing surface, at Hermione's extraordinary competence and the ferocity with which she applied it to things she decided mattered, at Neville, who had walked into September thinking he might not be magical enough and was now someone you would notice in a room even when he wasn't doing anything notable, which was the truest kind of change. "There are 6 more Horcruxes," Harry said. "Probably. One of them is in me, which Loki is handling. The other 5 we need to find." He paused. "Voldemort is going to try to come back. We have time, but not unlimited time, and the Ministry is going to be occasionally useful and occasionally an obstacle depending on the day." "Sounds like this year," Ron said. "This year was the tutorial," Harry said. "Everything coming is harder." "Brilliant," Ron said with complete sincerity. "What do we know about the Horcruxes?" Hermione asked, and she'd closed both books now, which meant this had moved from background processing to active priority. "A diary," Harry said. "Almost certainly Riddle was keeping records, and a diary is exactly the kind of object a 16-year-old would use. A ring, probably his maternal grandfather's, something with family history that he'd have wanted to claim and transform. A locket, Slytherin's, if the legends about his collection are accurate. A cup, something of Ravenclaw's, and something else I'm not certain of the last one." He paused. "I've been researching Riddle's history, the orphanage, Hogwarts, his post-Hogwarts movements. There's a shape to what he chose. Things with power already in them," Hermione said. "Things that meant something. He wanted his Horcruxes to be significant," Harry said. "Yes. He was making a statement as much as a strategy. He wanted to be immortal, but he also wanted his immortality to mean something, to carry weight. He's vain in that specific way." "So we follow the vanity," Ron said. "We follow the history," Harry said. "And we follow what I know about stories. Every Horcrux is a narrative, the lie of his continued wholeness. If I understand the narrative, I can counter it." The train moved through a tunnel and the compartment went briefly dark. And when the light came back, Hermione was writing in her notebook and Ron was annotating something on the chessboard margin, and Neville was looking out the window with the expression of someone who has decided they are in exactly the right place and intends to stay. Harry turned back to the window. His reflection looked back at him, steady, unhurried, green-eyed. "I show not your face," the mirror had said, "but your heart's desire." He hadn't understood fully in that moment what he'd been looking at. Not the family and the reflection, that was part of it, but not the center. The center was himself, standing in the mirror's frame without wanting to step into it, without the desperate reach toward the image. His heart's desire was not to have what he'd lost. It was to be what he was, fully and deliberately, without the shape of it being decided by anyone else. He was already doing it. He turned away from the window and picked up his book and let the train carry him home, not to Privet Drive. Because Privet Drive had never been home and the word didn't apply. Toward the summer. Toward the next phase of a problem he'd already begun to solve, toward everything that was coming that he would face the way he'd faced everything that had already come. Directly. Without apology, as himself. Outside the window in the strip of sky above the racing countryside, a shape moved that was too large for a bird and too deliberate for a cloud, keeping pace with the train with the ease of something that traveled between worlds for leisure. A father keeping an eye on things in his specific, oblique, entirely Loki way. Harry didn't look up, but he smiled at the glass. Chapter 6. The Lee Smith's son Summer arrived at Privet Drive like an uninvited guest, loud, hot, and entirely indifferent to whether it was wanted. Harry spent the first week back doing something that looked, from the outside, like nothing. He sat in the garden in the mornings with a book, helped Petunia with the washing up without being asked, which confused her so thoroughly she dropped a plate, and ate his meals with the quiet, present attention of someone who has returned from somewhere significant and is choosing to be where they are while they're there. Vernon watched him with the wary suspicion of a man who has learned that Harry's calm is more concerning than his disruptions. Dudley avoided him with the instinct of someone who has absorbed, without quite articulating, that the balance of their shared world has permanently shifted. Harry let it be. He'd set up a correspondence system before leaving Hogwarts. Hedwig was fast, reliable, and had apparently taken a personal interest in the efficiency of the operation that Harry found both impressive and slightly intimidating. Letters went to Ron, to Hermione, to Neville. The letters back were themselves diagnostic. Ron's were full of Quidditch results and family news and the occasional chess puzzle that Harry solved over breakfast. Hermione's were dense and cross-referenced, and occasionally included pressed pages from books she'd found relevant. Neville's were careful and specific and grew longer each week, which Harry tracked as a metric. The research letters were separate. Those went to a post box in Diagon Alley that Hermione had arranged through her parents with the impressive bureaucratic competence of a child who had decided that a dead letter drop was a necessary feature of any well-organized operation. He was building a picture of Tom Riddle, not the monster, the man. The child before the monster, the student, the seams of the thing before it became what it became. He'd written to Dumbledore in early June, requesting access to Hogwarts records pertaining to Riddle's school career, on the grounds that understanding an enemy's history was tactical preparation. Dumbledore had replied within 2 days with the records and a note that said only, "I'm glad someone is doing this properly." Harry read them 3 times and then sat with the reading. Tom Marvolo Riddle had been extraordinary. That was the thing that struck him most, not the dark magic, not the manipulation, but the raw scope of what the boy had been. Top of his year every year. Capable of things at 16 that qualified wizards twice his age couldn't manage. A mind that ran fast and wide and deep, that could hold multiple complex problems simultaneously and turn them against each other in useful ways. And afraid, Harry thought. All that capability and underneath it, running continuously, the fear of going back to the orphanage. The fear of being ordinary. The fear that his power was the only thing that separated him from everyone else, and that without it he was nothing, a half-blood in a world that already had categories for him, and none of them were flattering. He'd turned that fear into Voldemort, and Voldemort into a lie he'd convinced the world was true, and the lie had run for 50 years on the fuel of other people's terror. Harry understood it. Not excused it, understood it, which was different, and which was what he needed. He wrote to Hermione, the pattern of what he chose for Horcruxes tracks his time at Hogwarts. Each one corresponds to something he wanted and was denied or something he took and resented having to take. The diary is first, it's the most personal, the most Riddle rather than Voldemort. Find everything about his time in the Chamber of Secrets. Find Moaning Myrtle. She wrote back in 4 days, already found her, she talks a lot. Also found a reference to the diary in the Hogwarts accession records. It was Riddle's own property, registered when he arrived. Standard practice for enchanted objects. More to follow. The summer went this way, letters and reading and the slow building architecture of a plan that was currently more foundation than structure. Because he was 12 and Voldemort was not yet reconstituted, and the time for the plan was later, which meant the time for the preparation was now. He was in the garden on a Tuesday morning in mid-July when the feeling came. It wasn't dramatic. It arrived the way important things sometimes did, quietly, without announcement. The way weather changes before you see the sky shift. A pressure at the back of his mind, and then the particular sensation he'd learned to associate with the fragment, the tiny contained Voldemort piece that Loki had confirmed lived somewhere in the scar tissue of the curse scar, doing something it hadn't done before. Moving slightly, pushing at the edges of its containment. Harry set his book down, he breathed carefully. The scar didn't hurt. It never had, not the way the books described. Because the divine element around the fragment apparently made it impossible for the fragment to push through to sensation in any meaningful way. But he could feel it in the same way you could feel something in a room that you couldn't see. The quality of the air changed, the available space felt different. He waited. The pressure receded. He picked up his book. He wrote to Loki that evening not by owl, because owls couldn't cross dimensional boundaries reliably, but in the way Loki had shown him in June, which involved a specific combination of spoken intention and a particular quality of light that Harry had found could be reliably produced by holding a clear glass of water in direct sunlight and speaking into it, which sounded ridiculous and worked perfectly. "The fragment is restless," he said into the water light. "Whatever you're working on, accelerate the timeline if you can." He got a reply 3 days later via a playing card that appeared in his book, a joker naturally with writing on the back that said, "Working on it, don't let it distract you. Also, the scar will itch on Thursdays for the next month. I'm told this is normal and you should ignore it." Harry noted the itch arrived exactly on Thursday and ignored it. The letter from the ministry arrived on the 15th of August with the specific officious energy of correspondence that has been composed by committee. It was addressed to Mr. H. Potter on ministry letterhead, opened with 3 paragraphs of formal preamble that Harry skimmed, and arrived at its point in the 4th paragraph, which informed him that in light of the events of the previous academic year and the questions they raised, the Ministry of Magic's Department of Magical Law Enforcement would like to invite Mr. Potter to a formal interview at the ministry on August 21st. Invite was doing considerable work in that sentence. Vernon found the letter at breakfast and read it 3 times with the expression of a man who has been trying to forget that the magical world exists and keeps receiving reminders. "Ministry," he said. "Is that like they're their government?" "Yes," Harry said, "and they want to interview you." "They want to evaluate me," Harry said, which was the more accurate version. "Decide how to think about me, figure out what category I belong in." He reached for the toast. "I'm going to go." Yes, well, obviously," Vernon started and then stopped and then said with the specific gruffness of a man attempting something that doesn't come naturally, is there anything you need for that?" Harry looked at his uncle. Vernon was red-faced and uncomfortable and was looking at a point slightly above Harry's head with the dedication of a man who has made a decision and is seeing it through regardless of personal difficulty. There was something in it, not love. They were well past the point of either of them pretending that was on the table, but something adjacent to it, something that was the shape care makes when it's been living a long time in a body that doesn't know what to do with it. "No," Harry said, "but thank you." Vernon nodded once sharply and returned to his newspaper, and that was that. The Ministry of Magic was underground and enormous and deeply committed to its own importance, which Harry had expected from everything he'd read. He came with Mrs. Figg, who had it emerged a semi-official role as his magical guardian in the non-wizarding world and took the responsibility with the precision of someone who had been waiting for it to become relevant, and they were met in the atrium by a young ministry official named Percy Weasley, who was doing his summer internship with the evident joy of someone who has found their natural habitat and intends to stay forever. "Harry," Percy said, and then remembered he was being professional. "Mr. Potter, welcome to the ministry. I've been assigned to escort you to the meeting room." "How's the family?" Harry asked as they walked. Percy's professionalism relaxed slightly. "Ron gets a letter from you every week," he said. "He reads them at breakfast and then puts them away very quickly as if he thinks no one noticed." "He reads them at breakfast," Harry said. He found this disproportionately pleasing. "Mum wants to invite you to the Burrow," Percy said. "She mentioned it about 6 times before I left. I meant to mention it as if it's my own idea." "Tell her I'd love to come," Harry said. "Genuinely." Percy looked at him sideways with the expression of a person recalibrating. "You're not what I expected," he said. "Nobody is," Harry said pleasantly and followed him into the lift. The meeting room was large and formal with the ministry's characteristic design philosophy of imposing through architecture. There were 4 people already seated. Bagnold at the head of the table, which was encouraging, Fudge to her left, which was neutral. A severe woman in aura robes Harry didn't recognize, and a man with a quick, assessing gaze and the particular bearing of someone who operates from the assumption that he sees more than other people, and is generally correct about this. This last man was introduced as Alastor Moody, Senior Auror, and Harry paid him the particular attention he reserved for people who were not performing. "Mr. Potter," Bagnold said, "thank you for coming." "Of course," Harry said and sat down and waited. The meeting opened with a review of his account of the previous June's events, Bagnold reading from notes, Harry confirming or clarifying where needed, Fudge making occasional small sounds that were not quite interjections but wanted to be. The severe Auror, introduced as Amelia Bones, head of the DMLE, asked 3 very good questions that Harry answered fully and watched her write down with approval. Moody said nothing for 45 minutes. He watched Harry with the assessing gaze of a man running a continuous evaluation. Harry watched him back, which produced in Moody the small, approving nod of someone who respects being noticed. The Horcrux theory, Bones said on the 46th minute. You've submitted a written analysis through the headmaster's office. Our cursebreakers reviewed it. And, Harry said. And it's correct, she said, in the tone of someone who finds this simultaneously impressive and inconvenient. Substantially correct. There are one or two refinements our people would add, but the fundamental theoretical framework and the identification of the relevant objects, the diary specifically, match our own research. The ministry has been looking, Harry said. Quietly, Bones said, since last year's events, your intelligence combined with ours, she paused and looked at him with the direct gaze of someone making an offer, would give us a considerably stronger position. I'm 11, Fudge said helplessly. 12 in July, Harry said. But the age point stands, Minister. I'm a student. I'm not a ministry operative. What I can offer is information and theoretical analysis. What I expect in return is that the ministry acts on it rather than filing it. A partnership, Bones said. A working relationship, Harry said, with the clear understanding that I'm not an asset or an instrument. I'm a person with a specific problem and specific capabilities and a strong preference for dealing with the problem before it becomes significantly more catastrophic. Moody spoke for the first time. What do you know about Voldemort's followers? The name in Moody's mouth was unremarkable, a professional term used with the flat precision of someone who has been at war and does not have the luxury of euphemism. Some are imprisoned, Harry said. Azkaban, various sentences. Some claimed Imperius and were released, which is a complicated situation legally and factually. Some went to ground and have been waiting. The ones waiting are the most relevant. They're the ones most likely to be actively seeking the Horcruxes or attempting to prepare conditions for his return. He paused. There's a man named Lucius Malfoy. Fudge went slightly pale. He claimed Imperius, Harry said. He may have been telling a version of the truth. I think he was genuinely under Voldemort's influence for part of the period in question. But he's not currently under anyone's influence, and he's been moving pieces for the last decade. He knows things about the Horcruxes. Specifically, I believe he has the diary. The room was very quiet. You believe, Bones said carefully. I believe, Harry said. I don't have evidence yet. I'm working on it. How, Moody said. Research, Harry said, and a source. What source? Harry looked at Moody for a moment. One I'd rather not identify in a room this size, he said. Not because I don't trust everyone present, but because the source has specific privacy requirements and I intend to respect them. Moody looked at him with the evaluating gaze, then he nodded once. Fair. Fudge had recovered slightly. Mr. Potter, I want to be clear that the ministry's position on the threat level is. What I'd suggest, Harry said, and said it with the voice that made things settle into the shapes he named, pleasantly and without drama, is that the ministry's position on the threat level be accurate and that whatever public communication strategy you decide on be distinct from your internal assessment. There's nothing wrong with managing public information carefully. There's significant danger in the internal assessment matching the managed version. Fudge opened his mouth. You know I'm right, Harry said. You knew it in June and you know it now. Fudge closed his mouth. Something moved in him, the same slow movement from June, the quiet capitulation of a man who is not bad at his job when he lets himself do it honestly. All right, he said. All right, what do you need from us? Access to Azkaban prisoner files for specific individuals, Harry said. Records of Voldemort's known associates and their post-war movements, whatever your cursebreakers have on Horcrux signatures and detection. He paused, and a direct line to Madame Bones, not through channels. Bones looked at him with the expression of someone who has been doing this job long enough to recognize when a resource is worth the administrative complications. Done, she said. The burrow smelled like bread and grass, and the specific productive chaos of a house that had been fully occupied for decades by people who genuinely liked each other. Harry stepped through the front door and was immediately engulfed by Molly Weasley, who hugged him with the conviction of someone who had been reading about him for 11 years and had formed very specific feelings on the subject. He hugged her back. He hadn't had much practice, but the instinct turned out to be surprisingly operational. You're too thin, she said, releasing him and looking at him with the assessing gaze of a woman for whom feeding people is both skill and love language. You're going to eat everything I put in front of you. That sounds like an ideal arrangement, Harry said. Ron appeared at the top of the stairs looking pleased and slightly embarrassed in equal measure. You're here. I'm here, Harry confirmed. Good, come up, I want to show you something. The something turned out to be a wizarding chess set that Ron had been modifying, not the pieces themselves, but the strategy manual he'd been annotating since Christmas, 3 months of thinking about openings and endgames, and the specific psychology of opponents who played aggressively versus defensively. Harry sat on Ron's bed and read through it with the focused attention he gave to things that were genuinely interesting. And it was genuinely interesting. Ron's analysis was sharp and his instincts about opponent behavior were good in the same way they were good in non-chess contexts, which was the mark of someone who was actually thinking about people rather than just pieces. "This is really good," Harry said. "Don't sound surprised," Ron said. "I'm not surprised," Harry said. "I'm confirming an assessment I've held since October." He flipped to a page near the back. "This section on the sacrifice play, you use sacrifice differently to most players. You're not sacrificing to gain material advantage, you're sacrificing to gain psychological advantage." Ron looked at him. "Yeah, because if your opponent is responding to your sacrifices rather than playing their own game, you own the pace of the match." "Same principle as the quarrel situation," Harry said. Ron blinked. Yeah, actually yes. You think in systems," Harry said. "You've always been doing it. You do it with people and situations, not just boards." He handed the notebook back. "That's valuable, more valuable than most people tell you." Ron took the notebook with the particular expression he sometimes had when receiving accurate, positive information without the framing he expected around it, slightly caught off guard, slightly more pleased than he wanted to show. "Hermione's coming Saturday," he said, moving on with the brisk efficiency of someone declining to be emotional about a thing. "She's found something about the Riddle diary." "She told me," Harry said. "The Chamber of Secrets, the entrance." "In the girls' bathroom on the second floor," Ron said, with the expression of someone who has received this information recently and is still processing the territorial implications. "Myrtle's bathroom." "Myrtle was the one Riddle killed to make the chamber's Horcrux," Harry said. "She's been haunting the bathroom since 1943. She has information she doesn't know she has." "You're going to talk to a ghost," Ron said. "I'm going to listen to a ghost," Harry said. "There's a difference." "Right," Ron said. "And the chamber itself," Parseltongue, Harry said. Ron stared at him. You speak, snake." "It's an inherited trait on the divine side," Harry said. "I've been able to do it since I was small. I can speak to snakes, I can understand snake-based magical systems," he paused. "And I can open a chamber that was sealed in Parseltongue, which is going to be useful." "Is there anything you can't do?" Ron said, and it was almost entirely admiring with only the faintest edge of something that was not quite envy and not quite anything else, the slight vertigo of someone who is keeping pace with something that moves faster than expected. "Plenty," Harry said. "I can't fly a broom and read at the same time. I've tried," Ron laughed. "You've tried. Several times, it doesn't work." "You are," Ron said, "legitimately the strangest person I've ever." "You said that on the train," Harry said. "It keeps being true," Ron said. Hermione arrived on Saturday with 2 bags of books and the expression of someone who has been thinking very fast for 2 weeks and is ready to externalize it. She sat down at the kitchen table while Molly made tea with the particular efficiency of a woman for whom tea was both beverage and response to situations, and she laid out 3 documents and her research notebook and began. The diary was Riddle's, confirmed. It had been in Riddle's possession throughout his school years and afterward. After his disappearance, it had passed through several hands. Hermione had traced it through accession records, Nocturne Alley auction records from the early 80s, and 2 purchase records that led eventually to a family who had donated a substantial quantity of dark objects to a collection that had then been seized and distributed. "Distributed to where?" Harry asked. "Some to the Ministry, some to private collectors." She looked at him. "Some handed back to," the book uses the phrase, "original claimants." "Malfoy," Harry said. "I can't prove it," she said. "I know, but the shape of it fits. The diary is powerful and it's specific to Riddle. Malfoy would know what it was and what it could do, and he'd want to keep it." He looked at the documentation. "What can it do?" "The book section I found suggests diary Horcruxes are different from object Horcruxes," Hermione said. "A diary is designed to receive and respond, so the soul fragment inside it can be interactive, it can project, can influence, can essentially inhabit a person who writes in it long enough." She paused. "It's a possession vector." "Subtle," Harry said. "Voldemort style, not brute force infiltration." "It's dangerous for whoever finds it," Hermione said. "Which is probably the point," Harry said. "It was left deliberately, or it will be. Malfoy has it, but Voldemort intended it to be used. At some point in the next year or 2, Malfoy will put it somewhere, someone will find it, and whoever finds it will be used to reopen the chamber and feed the basilisk and cause chaos," Ron said. "Create a crisis that Malfoy and Voldemort's allies can exploit," Harry said. "Classic, efficient." He looked at Hermione. "We need to get the diary before that happens." "From Lucius Malfoy," Ron said. "From Draco, probably," Harry said. "Malfoy might give it to him as a, I don't know, an assignment, a test, something that lets him keep his hands clean while the diary does its work." "Draco," Ron said with the tone of someone who has been making peace with something incrementally and has not quite finished the process. "He warned me about his father in June," Harry said. "He's not committed to that side, he's not committed to ours either, but he's looking for a way out of the commitment his family's already made for him." He paused. "If the diary comes to him, he'll need to know what it is before it works on him." "You're going to warn Draco Malfoy?" Ron said. If it comes to it, yes, Harry said. Ron looked at the ceiling for a moment with the expression of someone checking whether this was the hill they wanted to stand on and deciding it wasn't. All right, he said, fine. Hermione was looking at Harry with the expression she had when she was tracking something. You've been planning this since the train home, she said. Since the library in November, Harry said. The diary was always the first move. Get the diary, remove the possession vector, prevent the chamber crisis, remove one Horcrux and deny Voldemort a critical asset in his return. He looked at them both. It's a better second year if we do it proactively. As opposed to reactively, Hermione said. We've established I don't do reactive, Harry said. She wrote something in her notebook. The basilisk, she said. If the chamber is opened and the basilisk is freed, either by us or by someone else getting to the diary first. I speak Parseltongue, Harry said. The basilisk is a snake. A very old, very large, extremely dangerous snake that has been living in a pipe system under a school for 1,000 years and has exactly one instruction, which is to attack non-Slytherin students on Slytherin's orders. He paused. I can give it different instructions. Hermione stared at him. You can redirect the basilisk. If I get there first, Harry said, and the basilisk venom destroys Horcruxes, Hermione said, already ahead of him, the Fang could destroy the diary. The Fang could destroy every Horcrux we find, Harry said. Ron looked at the chessboard in the corner with the expression of someone watching a very good opening gambit reveal its full implications. So the plan is get into the chamber before anyone else does, talk the basilisk out of killing people, collect a Fang, use it on the diary, and then work backward through the rest of the Horcruxes. The plan, Harry said, is more complicated than that and less complicated than you'd expect. Great, Ron said. Brilliant. When do we start? We already started, Harry said. We started in November. He was in the garden again, the evening before the Hogwarts Express, the last evening of summer. The sky was doing something spectacular in the west, long bands of orange and violet, the specific theater of late August sunsets that seemed to be compensating for the months of gray ahead. Harry sat on the back step with his knees up, and his hands wrapped around a mug of tea Molly had pressed on him before he'd left the burrow, which he'd brought home for reasons he didn't fully examine. The playing card appeared in his book. Different card this time, the King of Spades, because Loki's humor was consistent. On the back, the extraction method is ready. Come to the edge of the Forbidden Forest on the second Saturday of term. Bring no one. Harry read it twice, turned the card over, put it in his pocket. He thought about the fragment in his scar. He thought about what it would feel like to have it removed, whether it would hurt, whether he'd feel different after, whether the divine element in his blood that had been containing it would expand into the freed space or simply contract. He thought about the Horcruxes and the diary and the chamber and the basilisk and the slow, patient architecture of Voldemort's return and the slightly faster, more improvised architecture of his own prevention of that return. He thought about his mother who had been 2 generations from divine blood and had carried it quietly through a life that had been extraordinary by any measure, who had walked into a house in Godric's Hollow and stood between a killing curse and a child, and who had not done it because she was told to, or because it was planned, or because anyone had calculated that her sacrifice would produce the necessary magical conditions. She'd done it because it was her child, and that was the end of the calculation. He thought about truth and lies and the space between them where stories lived. He thought about what Loki had said, all reality is narrative, and the narrator who commits absolutely to the story determines what the story becomes. He had committed. He was committed. Not to a performance of Harry Potter, not to the chosen one, the boy who lived, the weapon Dumbledore had been carefully shaping toward a single purpose. He was committed to himself, which was a different and considerably more stable foundation, because you could argue with a story but you couldn't argue with a person who knew exactly what they were. He was the son of the Leesmith. He carried divine blood and divine power and 11 years of Dursley-forged self-sufficiency and 8 months of Hogwarts-forged friendship. And he was going back tomorrow. And there were Horcruxes to find and a basilisk to negotiate with and a diary to destroy and a Draco Malfoy to probably save from his own family's worst intentions. And somewhere in Albania, a diminished fragment of a fractured soul was already beginning to gather itself for the next attempt. And all of this was coming, and Harry was sitting on the back step of number 4 Privet Drive drinking Molly Weasley's tea in the last light of August. And he was, genuinely, completely, without performance or pretense, ready. Vernon appeared at the back door. Harry turned. Trains tomorrow, Vernon said. Yes, Harry said. Vernon stood there for a moment in the way he sometimes did at the end of the summer, which was the way of a man who had a great deal he had never said and had arranged his life to avoid having to say it and was occasionally at specific moments aware of the cost. Right, he said. Well, he put his hand briefly on the door frame. Good luck with all of it. Thank you, Harry said. Vernon went back inside. Harry finished his tea and looked at the darkening sky and thought that the world was full of people who were more complicated than their worst choices and less complicated than their best moments, and that this was, on balance, something worth working with rather than against. He went inside. He finished packing. He went to sleep. And in the space between worlds, in the specific darkness that was not absence but rather a fullness too dense for ordinary light, Loki moved through the distances with the ease of someone who has been doing this since before distances were a concept. And the particular satisfaction in him, the warmth of it, the pride of it. The specific Loki-shaped love that expressed itself in pranks and in plans, and in playing cards tucked into books, and in watching a son move through a world that was trying to define him and simply declined to be defined, was for once entirely unperformed. It was just true, which was, for the god of lies, the most remarkable thing of all. The Hogwarts Express left King's Cross at 11 o'clock precisely. Harry sat in the compartment with Ron and Hermione and Neville and watched London give way to countryside and felt the year opening ahead of him like a door that had been waiting for exactly this hand. "Okay," Ron said, setting up his chess pieces. "Tell us everything, the full plan, all of it." "Some of it changes depending on variables we don't control yet," Harry said. "Tell us what you have," Hermione said. "And don't leave anything out," Neville said, which was the most assertive thing he'd said to Harry since September and landed exactly right. Harry looked at the three of them, at the people who had chosen him, not the name, not the scar, not the famous survival, but the actual specific person underneath all of that, and he felt the story organize itself, the way stories did when you understood them from the inside, when you were not a character moving through someone else's narrative but the author committing absolutely to your own. "The diary comes first," he said. "Here's what I know." He talked for the next 3 hours while the countryside moved past and the light changed and the train carried them north toward Hogwarts, toward everything coming. And in the rhythm of the telling he could hear something underneath the words, the voice his power lived in, the voice that made things true, not lying now, not performing, just speaking the story into being the way it was always going to go. The son of the Lee Smith telling the truth, which was of course the most powerful lie of all.